Welcome. If you crave chilling true crime stories, real mysteries, and twists you'll never see coming, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and join a community that never looks away from the truth. Because every week, we shine a light where others won't. Are you ready? Let's begin. It started like so many teenage love stories do. Innocent, intoxicating, and just a little too good to be true. 17-year-old Emily, name changed for privacy, was living the kind of life that felt almost scripted. A small, safe suburban town. A circle of friends she'd known since childhood. Homework, pep rallies, football games under the Friday night lights. The world, at least for her, moved in predictable rhythms. Until that night. The late summer festival came once a year, just as August began to fold into September. It wasn't anything glamorous. Local bands, food trucks, a Ferris wheel that squeaked with every rotation. But to teenagers like Emily, it was freedom. No parents hovering, no curfews whispered through a cracked door. Just music vibrating through the humid night air, neon lights reflecting in wide eyes, and the feeling that anything could happen. Emily had gone with three of her closest friends. Jenna, always the bold one, Claire, the careful one, and Lily, who somehow balanced between the two extremes. The four of them wove through the crowd, laughing, clutching melting snow cones, and trying to act older than they really were. And then Emily saw him. Daniel. He wasn't from their school. She could tell instantly. There was something in his posture, the way he carried himself. He was older, maybe 19 or 20. His black leather jacket stood out in the sweltering heat, as if he wasn't bound by the weather or by rules. His dark hair fell just right. His smile was practiced but magnetic. Emily's eyes caught his, and in that single glance, something shifted. Her friends noticed immediately. "Don't even think about it," Jenna whispered, nudging her. He screams trouble, but that only made him more appealing. Isn't that how it always works? They ended up near the same food stand, standing in line for greasy fries. Daniel struck up the conversation first. His voice was low, confident, a little teasing. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, smirking. Emily laughed nervously, insisting she was. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like they were already sharing a secret. Could have fooled me. From that moment, Emily felt the magnetic pull, like stepping too close to the edge of a cliff but not being able to step back. That night, after the festival lights dimmed and the crowds thinned, Daniel found her again. He asked for her number. She gave it without hesitation. And so it began. The late-night phone calls stretched into hours. Emily would lie in bed with the glow of her phone lighting her face, whispering so her parents wouldn't hear. Daniel's voice was intoxicating. He talked about music, about leaving small towns behind, about how most people wasted their lives never taking risks. He made her feel like she was different, like she wasn't just another small-town girl doomed to live an ordinary life. Secret drives followed. Daniel would pull up in his beat-up car, music thumping, headlights cutting through the dark. Emily would sneak out of her bedroom window, heart pounding as she tiptoed across the yard. She'd slide into the passenger seat, adrenaline buzzing in her veins. The world outside her neighborhood felt electric. Gas stations lit up like oases at 2 a.m., empty roads stretching endlessly, laughter echoing into the night. They kissed in parking lots, under bridges, down forgotten dirt roads. For the first time, Emily felt alive, like she was starring in a movie, and Daniel was the leading man. Her friends rolled their eyes, but said nothing more. After all, Emily was happy, glowing even. What harm could it do? But cracks began to show, small at first, easy to brush aside. Daniel never talked much about himself. When Emily asked about his family, he changed the subject. When she asked where he worked, he gave vague answers. He never wanted her to see his apartment. And then there were the stares. At first, Emily thought it was flattering. When she laughed with other boys at school, Daniel's eyes would narrow, his jaw would tighten. "You don't need to waste time with guys like that," he'd say. When she texted friends instead of answering his calls immediately, he grew cold, distant. Then came the apologies, the sweet words, the promises that he just cared too much. Emily told herself it was passion, that this is what real love felt like. But deep down, a small voice whispered, something isn't right. One evening in late September, Daniel took her to the lake. The air was crisp, stars scattered across the water's reflection. They sat on the hood of his car, silence stretching comfortably between them. Then Daniel asked a question that lingered in the night air like smoke. Would you ever leave everything behind? Just disappear with me? Emily laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but Daniel's expression stayed serious. His eyes searched hers, waiting. I don't know, she stammered. My family, school. I can't just... His smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. He leaned in, kissed her, and whispered, one day you'll see. You're not like the rest of them. It was the kind of line that could make a teenage girl's heart race. And it did. But looking back, it was also the first warning. The first thread in a web that would grow tighter, darker, and more dangerous than Emily could ever have imagined. For now, though, she was still caught up in the high. Still convinced she had found something rare, something worth fighting for. And isn't that always how these stories begin? Emily's parents weren't naive. They had raised a teenage daughter, after all. They knew the warning signs. Late-night whispers behind closed doors, sudden changes in mood, a sharp increase in secrecy. But with Daniel, it wasn't just the normal turbulence of first love. There was something heavier. Her mother noticed first. It was the little things. The way Emily's phone never left her hand, even during dinner. The way she jumped when it buzzed, answering with urgency as if silence would ignite an alarm. The way she retreated to her room, locking the door when she'd never needed to before. Her father noticed something different. It was Daniel himself. When he came to the house the first time, he didn't shake hands. Didn't offer the respectful small talk most boys used when meeting a girlfriend's parents. Instead, Daniel stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, eyes darting around like he was assessing the space, measuring it for exits. It wasn't nerves. It was control. Where do you work, Daniel? Her father asked casually, keeping his voice even. Daniel smiled that practice smile. Here and there. Mostly side projects. I'm not chained to a 9-to-5. Her father pressed. And school? College. I'm figuring things out, Daniel said, his tone edged with impatience. I don't really believe in the system. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he'd already dismissed the older man as irrelevant. That night, when Emily's parents were alone, her father shook his head. Something's off. He's too smooth. What's the word, performative? Her mother frowned, folding laundry at the end of the bed. I think he's dangerous. But Emily, wrapped up in the glow of first love, couldn't see it. Or maybe she didn't want to. At first, the boundary setting seemed simple. No boys over past 10, her father said. No secret car rides after midnight. And if he wants to see you, he comes to the door, not honking from the street. But Daniel treated those rules like challenges, not boundaries. He began showing up uninvited. Sometimes at the school parking lot, leaning against his car like he owned the space. Sometimes outside Emily's bedroom window, headlights flashing in coded signals. Once, Emily woke to see his silhouette standing in the yard, staring up at her window until she opened it. Her father confronted him once, stepping outside in his slippers, voice low and firm. You don't come here without permission. Ever again. Do you understand? Daniel smirked, hands sliding into his jacket pockets. I'm not here to cause trouble, sir. I just couldn't sleep. Needed to see Emily. It wasn't an apology. It was a declaration. At first, Emily defended him. He just loves me so much, she told her mom, rolling her eyes at the constant warnings. You guys don't get it. He's intense, sure, but that's just who he is. At least he actually cares. Her mother bit her tongue. She remembered her own teenage years, the intoxicating pull of being someone's everything. But deep down, she knew intensity wasn't love, it was possession. Soon, the love that had once felt thrilling became suffocating. Daniel's phone calls multiplied. Dozens a day, sometimes more. If Emily didn't answer, her phone would light up with repeated calls until her hands shook from the vibration. When she finally picked up, his voice came sharp, demanding, Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you answer me? At first, Emily laughed it off, smoothing things over. But the questions never stopped. They burrowed into every part of her life, like roots cracking through concrete. Her friends felt the shift, too. Emily started canceling plans, always with flimsy excuses. Study sessions, family obligations, headaches. But Jenna, Claire, and Lily knew the truth. She was with Daniel. Always Daniel. When they confronted her, she grew defensive. You don't understand him, she snapped. He's been through things you wouldn't get. He just needs me. But it wasn't need. It was control. Daniel didn't like her friends. He made that clear. They don't want the best for you, he muttered during one of their late-night drives. They're jealous. They'd rather see you stuck in this little town with them than moving on with me. You're better than that, Emily. Slowly, she stopped answering her friends' texts. Her world narrowed to one person, one voice, one gravitational pull, Daniel. It happened one evening in October. They were parked behind an abandoned strip mall, their usual spot. Daniel was quiet, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Emily had been telling a story about a boy from her math class, something innocent, a joke he'd told that made the whole room laugh. But Daniel's jaw tightened. You think he's funny? Emily blinked, caught off guard. What? Yeah, it was just. You like him? No. Daniel, it was just a joke. His fist slammed against the dashboard. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Emily flinched, her chest tightening. Then, just as suddenly, he reached for her hand, his voice softening. I'm sorry. I can't stand the thought of losing you. You don't know what you mean to me. Emily's fear dissolved into sympathy. She nodded quickly, tears stinging her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. That was all he needed. The storm passed as quickly as it came. But the crack had formed. The real fracture came weeks later. They were arguing. She couldn't even remember about what. Something small. A delayed text, a forgotten plan. But Daniel's temper burned fast, and suddenly his hand balled into a fist. He punched the wall inches from her face, the drywall splintering under his knuckles. The sound echoed, vibrating in her bones. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought he might actually hit her. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled back, flexing his hand, eyes wide as if even he was surprised. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to. I would never hurt you. You know that, right? The next day, he showed up with flowers. A dozen roses, their thorns trimmed away. I was out of line, he said, voice thick with regret. I love you too much. That's all it is. Sometimes I don't know how to handle it. And Emily, young and eager to believe, accepted it. Because that's how it begins. The cycle, the apology, the flowers, the promises. But once that cycle starts, it rarely ends. What once felt like romance now felt like captivity. The shift wasn't sudden. It was gradual, creeping in like fog, until Emily could no longer see where the line between love and fear had blurred. It started with the car. At first, Emily thought she was imagining it. That beat-up sedan of Daniel's, the one with the dented fender and a rear-view mirror held together by duct tape, kept appearing in places it didn't belong. Parked across from the diner where she worked weekend shifts, idling near the grocery store when she stopped with her mom, cruising slowly down her street when she walked home from school. Always there, always watching. When she confronted him, Daniel brushed it off with a smile. Relax, babe. I just wanted to make sure you got home safe. But it didn't feel safe. It felt suffocating. Her friends noticed too. When they invited her out for pizza, Daniel showed up unannounced, sliding into the booth beside her, arm draped over her shoulders like a chain. When they went to the movies, he bought a ticket without asking, sitting so close he cut her off from the rest of the group. The tension followed him like a shadow. Conversations died when he was near. Laughter quieted. Eyes darted nervously, waiting for the next spark to set him off. One by one, the invitations stopped coming. Emily didn't blame her friends. She blamed herself. But the isolation worked in Daniel's favor. With each bridge burned, her world grew smaller, until it felt like there was no one left but him. By winter, Emily couldn't deny the truth anymore. She was exhausted, worn thin by the constant calls, the accusations, the surveillance disguised as love. She knew she had to end it. So one Friday afternoon, she did the hardest thing she'd ever done. Daniel, we can't do this anymore, she said, voice shaking. They stood behind the school gym, the cold air biting at her skin. I can't breathe. I need space. It's over. For a moment, Daniel just stared at her. His expression was unreadable, a storm cloud waiting to break. Then, his face twisted. Over. His voice rose, echoing off the brick walls. You think you can just leave me? After everything I've done for you? Emily's pulse quickened. I'm sorry. I can't. But Daniel wasn't listening. His voice climbed higher, raw with rage. You betrayed me. You lied to me. By now, students passing by had stopped to stare. Teachers emerged from the gym doors. The commotion grew until security had to step in, their hands firm on Daniel's arms as they pulled him away. He fought against them, screaming Emily's name, his eyes burning with fury. Emily stood frozen, her breath fogging in the winter air, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought that would be the end of it, that once he was removed, she would finally be free. But she was wrong. That night, Emily lay in bed, trying to push the scene from her mind. The yelling, the stares, the shame of being dragged into chaos she never wanted. But sleep didn't come easily. Near midnight, she heard it, the faint rattle of glass. Her eyes snapped open. She turned toward the window, half convinced it was her imagination. But then she saw it, her curtains swaying, the pain trembling. Emily crept closer, every muscle in her body tensed. And then she saw him, Daniel, standing in the yard, illuminated by the pale glow of the porch light. His face tilted upward, eyes locked on hers. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, motionless, staring. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her hand trembled as she pulled the curtain shut. In that moment, she knew this wasn't love anymore. It was something darker. From that night forward, Emily lived in a constant state of dread. Every knock at the door sent her heart racing. Every buzz of her phone carried the weight of another angry message, another threat wrapped in false affection. She couldn't step outside without scanning the street, searching for that dented sedan lurking in the shadows. She couldn't close her eyes without imagining his face pressed against the glass, watching, waiting. What had begun as teenage infatuation had twisted into full-blown stalking. And Emily, once bright and carefree, was now trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Emily's parents had been patient, far more patient than most would have been. They'd tried reason, they'd tried boundaries, they'd tried comfort. But nothing worked, because Daniel was relentless. Finally, after the countless phone calls, the uninvited visits, the screaming matches outside school, they gave Emily an ultimatum. "You need to file a restraining order," her mother said one evening, her voice firm but trembling. Her father sat across from her at the dinner table, arms crossed, his jaw set. "This isn't just young love anymore, Em. This is obsession. It's dangerous. And if you don't protect yourself, we can't protect you." But like so many victims, especially young ones, Emily was torn. She remembered the boy who once held her hand under starlit skies, who whispered promises of forever, who showed up with roses after fights. She clung to the belief that maybe, somehow, that boy still existed underneath the monster he had become. Fear battled guilt. Guilt battled love. Love battled reality. And in the end, she froze. She didn't file the paperwork. For a few days, things went quiet. No phone calls. No car idling at the end of the street. No figure standing in the yard. Emily almost allowed herself to believe it was over. Maybe Daniel had finally moved on. Maybe the storm had passed. But in reality, it was only gathering strength. It happened late on a Tuesday night. The house was quiet. Emily's parents were asleep. Emily lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her phone clutched in her hand. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt still, until the sound shattered the silence. Glass. Breaking. Her father bolted upright in the master bedroom, his heart pounding. At first, he thought it might have been the wind, a fallen branch against the window. But then came the unmistakable crash, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving through the downstairs living room. "Call 911, he hissed to his wife, throwing on his robe as he moved toward the door. Emily's mother, hands shaking, grabbed the phone from the nightstand. Daniel had broken in through the back door, shards of glass glittering across the tile like spilled diamonds. His face was twisted with rage, his hair matted with sweat. In his hand, a kitchen knife glinted under the dim light of the hallway. "Emily," he roared, his voice echoing through the house. "Emily, where are you?" Upstairs, Emily froze in terror, her body rooted to the mattress. Her father stepped out onto the landing, positioning himself between the stairs and his daughter's room. His heart raced, but his stance was steady. "Daniel," he called, his voice deep, commanding. "You need to leave. Right now." But Daniel didn't leave. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. At the top, father and intruder met. For a split second, time seemed to hold still. Then Daniel lunged. The knife arced upward, glinting. Emily's father grabbed his wrist, the two men grappling at the landing. Furniture toppled. Picture frames shattered. The sound of grunts and muffled cries filled the air. Emily, paralyzed in the doorway of her room, could only watch as her father fought desperately to keep the blade away from his chest. Downstairs, her mother's voice quivered into the phone. "Please, send police. He's in the house. He's got a knife. Please hurry." For a terrifying moment, Emily thought it was over. Daniel's strength was fueled by fury, by obsession, by something almost inhuman. He shoved her father against the wall, the knife mere inches from flesh. And then, faint at first, came the sound. Sirens. Wailing, growing louder, slicing through the night. Daniel's head snapped toward the window, his chest heaving. His grip faltered just enough for Emily's father to shove him backward, knocking the knife clattering to the floor. Red and blue lights danced across the walls as police cars screeched into the driveway. The front door burst open. Officers stormed the house, weapons drawn, commands booming through the chaos. "Drop it. Get on the ground." Daniel resisted, thrashing, screaming Emily's name as two officers wrestled him to the floor. His voice cracked with desperation, fury, obsession. "She belongs to me," he howled, spittle flying from his mouth. "Emily belongs to me." Handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. His body was dragged down the stairs, his screams echoing until the front door slammed behind him. Silence returned, but it wasn't peace. Because though Daniel was gone, the damage he left behind was carved into the walls of that house, etched into Emily's memory, branded onto her family's hearts. And Emily knew, even with him in cuffs, this nightmare was far from over. The flashing red and blue lights had faded. The broken glass had been swept from the floor. But for Emily and her family, the house never felt the same again. The night Daniel was dragged away in handcuffs should have brought relief. Instead, it left a silence that was heavier than the screams. A silence filled with what-ifs. What if the police hadn't come in time? What if her father hadn't been able to hold the knife back? What if Emily had filed that restraining order earlier? The questions haunted her. Daniel was charged with burglary, assault, and violating the no-contact order that had finally been placed against him after the break-in. In the sterile brightness of the courtroom, Emily sat just a few feet away from the boy who had once whispered love into her ear. He wore the same confident smirk, even in shackles. When the judge read the charges, he didn't flinch. When Emily's statement was read aloud, her voice trembling as she described the fear, the stalking, the night of the break-in, Daniel only stared at her. Not with shame, not with regret, but with the same twisted possession that had fueled his obsession from the start. He served time, but for Emily, the sentence wasn't measured in months or years. It was measured in nights spent double-checking the locks, in the flinch that came every time she heard tires screeching on asphalt, in the nightmares that pulled her back to that moment on the stairs, her father struggling against the blade. Some wounds don't heal when the gavel falls. For a while, Emily withdrew into herself. She avoided places she once loved. She stopped answering texts, even from the few friends who still reached out. She felt marked, as if everyone could see the girl who had fallen for the wrong boy, the girl who had let danger slip past her front door. But slowly, something changed. It began with a counselor at her school, who gently reminded her that what happened wasn't her fault. Then came a support group, where Emily sat in a circle of other women who had lived through the same cycle. The charm, the control, the explosion, the regret. There, she realized she wasn't alone. And when she found her voice again, she used it. Emily began speaking publicly, first in small classrooms, then at larger community events. She shared her story in stark, unpolished detail. The butterflies at the festival, the red flags she ignored, the way passion twisted into possession. She spoke not to frighten, but to warn, to remind others, especially young girls, that love should never feel like a cage. Her courage gave strength to others. Victims came forward, their stories spilling out after years of silence. Parents began listening more closely to their daughters' whispers. Teachers took notice of the warning signs. Emily's pain had become a beacon, but her story was far from isolated. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in 3 women will experience stalking or abusive behavior from a partner in their lifetime. 1 in 3. Behind those numbers are faces, friends, sisters, daughters, each carrying scars the world may never see. And the research is clear. The most dangerous time isn't always during the relationship itself. It's when the victim tries to leave. That's when obsession becomes desperation. That's when love mutates into violence. Emily had survived the break-in, the knife, the trial, but many do not. Years later, when Emily looked back on the girl she had been, the 17-year-old who thought danger looked exciting in a leather jacket, she wished she could whisper to her younger self, "Pay attention to the cracks. Listen to your instincts." Love should not hurt, control, or suffocate. But she couldn't change the past. What she could do was change the future, for herself and for others. Her story stands as a chilling reminder. What begins as a whirlwind romance can spiral into obsession, violence, and tragedy. Emily survived. But survival is not the ending. It is only the beginning of a different kind of fight, one to reclaim your life, your voice, and your freedom.
Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're into true crime stories told straight up, no distractions, just the story, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and like each video so you don't miss the next case I cover. Alright, let's get into today's story. On a chilly spring morning in 2017, the small town of Millbrook, Michigan, woke up to shocking news. Claire Donovan, a 24-year-old nursing student, was missing. The announcement spread like wildfire, through hushed whispers over steaming cups of coffee at Millbrook Cafe, through frantic text messages sent by friends who hadn't heard from Claire in days, and through local news anchors whose concerned tones only heightened the sense of dread hanging over the town. Claire wasn't just another name on a missing persons flyer. She was beloved in her community, the kind of young woman who made strangers smile in passing, who volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends, and who spent her summers organizing blood drives and health fairs. Her professors admired her dedication. Her classmates envied her confidence. To many parents, she was the daughter they hoped their own children would emulate, kind-hearted, ambitious, and grounded. But like many small-town stories that seem picture-perfect from the outside, there was a shadow following Claire. That shadow was Rachel Myers, her childhood best friend. Rachel wasn't just Claire's best friend, she was practically family. The two met when they were 7 years old, bonding over their shared love of mystery novels and matching glittery nail polish at a schoolbook fair. They were inseparable, two little girls with tangled braids, scraped knees, and a bond sealed with matching friendship bracelets they swore they'd never take off. Summers meant long days at Claire's family's lake house. The girls would spend hours swimming until their fingers pruned, whispering secrets under the covers with flashlights, and making elaborate plans for the future. Claire wanted to be a nurse. She dreamed of saving lives, of making her mark in the world. Rachel's dreams changed often. Sometimes she wanted to be a writer, sometimes a singer, sometimes a photographer. But one thing remained constant: she wanted Claire by her side. As they grew older, however, life started pulling them in different directions. Claire excelled in school, eventually earning a scholarship to a competitive nursing program. She interned at a hospital 2 towns over, balancing coursework with volunteer work, a part-time job, and a blossoming relationship with her boyfriend, Matt Carter. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed to struggle to find her footing. After high school, she drifted through a series of dead-end jobs: a cashier at the local grocery store, a waitress at Millbrook Diner, a receptionist at a failing salon. She often confided in Claire about feeling stuck, about watching everyone else move forward while she remained trapped. Claire always offered encouragement, telling Rachel she was talented and capable, but her reassurances only made Rachel feel smaller, more inadequate. To everyone else, Rachel was Claire's loyal shadow. She was quiet, dependable, and always there, tagging along to birthday parties, family barbecues, and weekend trips. But if you looked closely, if you really studied her eyes during those moments when she thought no one was watching, you might have seen something else, a flicker of envy. That envy had been simmering for years. And in the spring of 2017, it would begin to boil over. For days before Claire's disappearance, neighbors in her apartment complex reported hearing raised voices outside her unit. It was late, around midnight, and the shouting was loud enough to wake the block. Several neighbors peeked out of their windows, and one even stepped outside to make sure everything was okay. What they saw were two young women standing in the glow of the parking lot's dim streetlights, their voices sharp, angry. One of them, described as tall and blonde, was clearly Claire. The other, with dark hair and an oversized hoodie, was later confirmed to be Rachel. Though no one could make out every word, witnesses recalled hearing fragments of the argument. "Sick of you treating me like. You don't understand. Just leave me alone." Moments later, Claire stormed back into her apartment, slamming the door behind her. Rachel lingered in the parking lot for a few minutes before walking away. The neighbors chalked it up to a personal disagreement between friends. After all, Claire and Rachel had known each other forever. Didn't all best friends fight from time to time? No one thought much of it then. But in hindsight, that argument was the last confirmed sighting of Claire before she vanished. When Claire's mother, Linda Donovan, couldn't get a hold of her daughter the following morning, she initially brushed it off. Claire was busy, between school, work, and her hospital internship. It wasn't unusual for her to miss a call or two. By the afternoon, however, her mother's worry grew. She texted Claire. No response. She called again. Straight to voicemail. Linda reached out to Matt, Claire's boyfriend of 2 years. He hadn't heard from her either. She called Rachel, who claimed she hadn't seen Claire since earlier in the week. By evening, panic had fully set in. Claire wasn't just unresponsive, she seemed to have disappeared entirely. Her car was still parked outside her apartment. Her keys and purse were missing, but her phone was still on the kitchen counter, tucked beside a half-empty mug of coffee. That night, Claire's family reported her missing. Within hours, Millbrook police launched their search. Officers canvassed the area, knocking on neighbors' doors, interviewing friends, and tracing Claire's last known movements. Flyers with her photo were taped to telephone poles, community bulletin boards, and storefront windows. Local news stations ran her story on the evening broadcast, her smiling face filling television screens across Michigan. But what really shook the town was the realization that Claire's disappearance wasn't the kind of random crime you'd expect in a big city. This was Millbrook, a town with fewer than 9,000 residents, where people left their doors unlocked and gossip traveled faster than the wind. In Millbrook, everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. The deeper investigators dug, the more puzzling the case became. There were no signs of forced entry into Claire's apartment. Her neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything unusual, aside from the argument with Rachel days earlier. Her boyfriend, Matt, was quickly ruled out. He'd been out of town visiting family, with receipts and multiple witnesses to prove it. Attention soon turned to Rachel. At first, Rachel was cooperative. She sat down with detectives, nervously fidgeting with her hoodie sleeves as she recounted the last time she'd seen Claire. She admitted they'd argued but claimed it was nothing serious, just typical friend drama. According to Rachel, Claire had been stressed out from her internship and snapping at everyone. Rachel insisted she had nothing to do with her friend's disappearance. But as investigators pressed her for details, cracks in her story began to show. Her timeline was vague, her answers inconsistent. When detectives asked what the argument had been about, she hesitated before mumbling something about relationship drama and school stress. When asked where she went after leaving Claire's apartment, she claimed she'd walked home, but couldn't remember if she'd taken the shortcut through the park or the main road. Rachel's nervousness wasn't unusual. Plenty of innocent people get anxious under questioning. But to detectives, something about her demeanor felt off. As the search intensified, police began retracing Claire's last known movements. Security footage from a gas station near her apartment showed her car pulling into the lot around 7:15 p.m. the evening before she went missing. She filled her tank, bought a bottle of water, and drove off. Nothing about the footage seemed suspicious. Her phone records revealed that her last text message had been sent at 10:02 p.m. that night, to Matt, "Good luck with your interview tomorrow." You'll do amazing." After that, there was nothing, no calls, no texts, no social media activity. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. For Millbrook residents, Claire's disappearance was like a crack in the foundation of their tight-knit community. Suddenly, every face seemed suspicious, every shadow menacing. Parents clutched their children's hands a little tighter. People who had never locked their doors started double-checking their deadbolts at night. The Donovans, desperate for answers, offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Claire's whereabouts. Volunteers organized search parties, combing through woods, fields, and abandoned buildings. Local businesses donated supplies, flashlights, bottled water, and granola bars, to keep the search efforts going. Rachel attended several of these search parties. She helped tape up flyers and handed out water bottles, but people began whispering about her. Her behavior didn't match what people expected of a lifelong best friend. She seemed detached, almost robotic. She rarely cried. Instead, she stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, watching others with an unreadable expression. The more people whispered, the more Rachel withdrew. She stopped showing up to search parties. She stopped answering calls from Claire's family. And slowly, suspicion solidified into something heavier, blame. But to understand what really happened, we need to go back before the search parties, before the flyers, before that heated argument in the parking lot. We need to understand the complicated relationship between Claire Donovan and Rachel Myers. The story of Claire and Rachel wasn't one of a simple friendship. It was a tangled web of loyalty, love, envy, and dependency that had been building for over a decade. Claire was the golden girl. Even as a child, she had this natural magnetism, a bright, infectious smile that made people feel at ease. She was the kind of kid teachers adored and classmates admired. She got good grades without seeming to try, excelled at soccer, and was voted most likely to succeed in high school. Rachel was different. She was shy, introverted, and painfully self-conscious. She didn't make friends easily. But Claire, with her big heart and bigger smile, took Rachel under her wing. She invited her over after school, introduced her to her circle of friends, and made her feel seen. To Rachel, Claire wasn't just a best friend, she was a lifeline. Their friendship deepened in high school. While other girls drifted apart over boys, sports, and social cliques, Claire and Rachel remained inseparable. But beneath Rachel's loyalty was a growing insecurity. She couldn't help but notice how easily Claire navigated life, how teachers praised her, how boys lined up to ask her out, how parents looked at her like she could do no wrong. Rachel always felt like she was standing in Claire's shadow. By the time they graduated, their paths couldn't have been more different. Claire was headed to a prestigious nursing program, while Rachel stayed in Millbrook, working odd jobs and struggling to figure out her future. It wasn't that Rachel didn't want success. She did. But she always felt like she was a step behind, watching Claire's life take shape while her own felt like a blank page. When Claire called to share exciting news, a scholarship, a new internship, a glowing performance review, Rachel congratulated her with forced enthusiasm, even as resentment gnawed at her. Still, they remained close. Claire often went out of her way to include Rachel, inviting her to spend weekends at her apartment, bringing her along on trips with Matt, and helping her polish resumes for jobs she never seemed to get. Claire's kindness, while genuine, sometimes felt patronizing to Rachel, a reminder that she was the one who needed saving. That imbalance, that simmering tension, came to a head in the weeks leading up to Claire's disappearance. Witnesses recalled seeing Rachel and Claire together more frequently than usual that spring. They'd grab coffee at Millbrook Cafe, stroll through the local farmers market, or sit in Claire's car talking for hours. To outsiders, it looked like the two were simply reconnecting. But Rachel's journal, discovered later by investigators, painted a different picture. In one entry, Rachel wrote, "Sometimes I feel like Claire is pulling away. She's got her boyfriend, her school, her perfect life. I'm scared she doesn't need me anymore. I hate how much I need her." Another entry, written 2 weeks before Claire vanished, was darker. "She doesn't get it. She thinks she's better than me. Maybe she is. But she shouldn't treat me like I'm disposable. I won't let her." Those words would later send chills down the spines of detectives, but at the time, no one knew how much resentment was bubbling beneath Rachel's calm exterior. Then came the night of the argument. According to one neighbor, the shouting started around midnight. The sound of Claire's raised voice startled her. Claire was known for her calm demeanor, rarely raising her voice. Rachel's voice was sharper, more frantic. The neighbor remembered hearing Rachel yell something like, "You think you're so much better than me," followed by Claire's frustrated response, "I'm done, Rachel. I can't do this anymore." The neighbor peeked out her blinds, heart racing, but decided not to intervene. She assumed it was a personal dispute, maybe about a boyfriend or some petty drama. The argument lasted about 5 minutes before Rachel walked away and Claire slammed her door. It was the last time anyone saw Claire alive. When Rachel was first brought in for questioning, she insisted she loved Claire like a sister. She admitted they'd had a fight but claimed it was just about stupid stuff. She was calm, almost eerily so, as she spoke about her missing best friend. Detectives noted her demeanor but didn't press too hard, not yet. Without evidence tying Rachel to Claire's disappearance, they couldn't accuse her outright. Instead, they focused on gathering every scrap of information they could. They pulled phone records, collected surveillance footage, and interviewed Claire's professors, co-workers, and neighbors. One professor described Claire as exhausted but determined, saying she'd been juggling a brutal internship schedule but never let her grades slip. A co-worker at the hospital recalled Claire mentioning that she felt smothered by someone, though she hadn't said who. Investigators began to piece together a troubling picture. Claire, despite her bright smile and reputation, had been under immense pressure, not just from school and work, but from her closest friend. At this point in the story, Claire's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mystery, one with layers of history, resentment, and obsession. And while search parties combed through Millbrook's forests and streams, while volunteers plastered her face on every telephone pole in town, one question haunted everyone who knew Claire Donovan. What really happened to her that night? On April 12, Claire Donovan failed to show up for her nursing exam. At first, her classmates assumed she was running late. Claire was known for being punctual, but everyone has off days. Maybe she overslept, maybe she wasn't feeling well. But as the minutes ticked by, whispers began to ripple through the lecture hall. Claire wasn't just late, she wasn't coming. Her boyfriend, Tyler Matthews, immediately sensed something was wrong. Tyler was a third-year engineering student who had been dating Claire for over 2 years. He described her as reliable to a fault, the kind of person who sets 3 alarms just to make sure she's on time, he would later tell police. When Claire didn't text him back that morning, Tyler started calling. At first, it went to voicemail. Then, her phone stopped ringing altogether, sending him straight to her inbox. A tight knot of dread formed in his chest. He skipped his own classes and drove straight to her apartment, a small, second-story unit on the quiet edge of Millbrook. When he arrived, Claire's car was parked exactly where she'd left it the night before. Her front door was unlocked, a detail that immediately unsettled him. Claire was careful, almost overly cautious about safety. She always locked her doors, even during the day. Stepping inside, Tyler felt his stomach drop. Everything looked untouched. Her phone sat on the nightstand, still plugged in and fully charged. Her purse was neatly draped over the back of a dining chair. A jacket hung on the hook by the door, a half-drunk cup of coffee sat cold on the kitchen counter. It was as if she had simply vanished in the middle of her morning routine. Tyler called her name. No response. He searched every corner of the apartment, hoping she'd somehow slipped past him. Maybe she was in the shower, maybe she'd gone out for a quick errand. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. Claire would never leave without her phone or her bag. He called her mother, Linda Donovan, who immediately drove over. Within the hour, Millbrook police arrived on the scene, and Claire was officially declared missing. Panic spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The Donovan family wasted no time organizing search efforts. Flyers with Claire's smiling face were posted on every telephone pole, bulletin board, and storefront in town. Volunteers combed through nearby woods and fields. Boats were deployed on the lake, and drones hovered over thick patches of forest, searching for any trace of the missing nursing student. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, showing pictures of Claire in her scrubs, at the lake, with her friends. She was painted as the kind of person everyone loved, bright, compassionate, destined for greatness. Her sudden disappearance was unthinkable. But as the community banded together to search, one person's absence didn't go unnoticed. Rachel Myers, Claire's lifelong best friend, wasn't showing up to any of the searches. At first, people chalked it up to grief. Maybe Rachel was too distraught to face the reality of her best friend being missing. Maybe she was helping in other ways. But as the days dragged on, Rachel's absence became harder to ignore. She didn't attend the volunteer meetings. She wasn't handing out flyers or helping organize search parties. Detectives quickly took note. When they brought Rachel in for questioning, she seemed calm, almost too calm. Sitting across from investigators, she folded her arms over her hoodie and spoke in a flat tone. She claimed she hadn't seen Claire in days, and that their last interaction had been a casual phone call earlier that week. But something about her story didn't sit right with Detective Laura Simmons, one of the lead investigators on the case. Simmons had spent 15 years in law enforcement, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. Rachel's demeanor wasn't just detached, it was oddly defensive. Detectives decided to dig deeper, starting with surveillance footage from around Claire's apartment complex. It didn't take long to find something strange. Footage from a gas station camera 2 blocks away revealed a familiar vehicle, an old, beat-up blue sedan belonging to Rachel Myers. The timestamp was chilling, April 11th, 3:14 a.m., just 24 hours before Claire's disappearance was reported. The footage showed Rachel's car slowly pulling out of Claire's driveway. No one else was visible in the frame. When detectives confronted Rachel with this information, her calm facade cracked. She stammered, fumbling for an explanation. She claimed Claire had called her that night, upset about a fight with Tyler. She said she'd gone over to check on her friend, but they hadn't spoken for long. Rachel insisted Claire was fine when she left. But her story was full of holes. Claire's phone records didn't show any calls to or from Rachel that night. And Tyler confirmed he hadn't been arguing with Claire at all. In fact, he'd been visiting family out of town. The deeper detectives dug, the more unsettling details they found. They combed through Rachel's social media, which painted a disturbing picture of obsession. Her Instagram was filled with hundreds of tagged photos with Claire, going all the way back to high school. The captions were increasingly cryptic. Some people forget who was there for them from the start. I'm tired of being the backup plan. Betrayal hurts more when it's from your own sister. There were dozens of posts like this, passive-aggressive, bitter, and always vaguely directed at someone. Investigators didn't have to guess who that someone was. Her Facebook wasn't much better. Rachel had written long, rambling posts about being used and forgotten, about feeling like her only friend in the world doesn't even care anymore. Friends from school commented with supportive messages, but Rachel rarely replied. It was clear Rachel had an unhealthy attachment to Claire. What outsiders saw as a close friendship was more like an obsession. Detective Simmons and her partner, Detective Mark Lawson, decided to bring Rachel in for a second interview, this time, with the footage and social media evidence laid out in front of her. Rachel's demeanor changed. She grew defensive, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her voice sharp. I didn't do anything to Claire, she insisted. You guys are wasting your time looking at me. Maybe she ran away, or something happened with Tyler. You're not even looking at him. But they had looked at Tyler. His alibi was airtight. He'd been hours away, staying at his parents' house for the weekend. He even had traffic camera footage placing his car 2 counties over. Detectives pressed harder, pointing out Rachel's inconsistencies. Why had she lied about the timing of her visit to Claire's apartment? Why hadn't she told them she was there at 3:14 a.m.? And why was she so evasive about what they'd talked about? Rachel broke down. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she finally admitted they'd had a fight. She was pulling away from me, Rachel said, her voice cracking. She was so busy with school and Tyler, and she didn't have time for me anymore. I felt like I was losing her. But I swear, I didn't hurt her. Detectives weren't convinced. They obtained a search warrant for Rachel's car and apartment. What they found would send shockwaves through the investigation. Inside Rachel's sedan, investigators noticed faint reddish-brown stains on the driver's side door. A quick field test confirmed what they feared: the stains were blood. In Rachel's apartment, they found something even more disturbing: a shoebox filled with mementos from her friendship with Claire. Inside were photos, letters, and trinkets, but also things Claire hadn't given her. A pair of earrings Claire's mother had bought her for her birthday. A sweater Tyler remembered seeing Claire wear the week before she vanished. Even more chilling were Rachel's journals. Pages upon pages filled with angry, obsessive writing. If she leaves me, I don't know what I'll do. She promised me forever, but she's already gone. If I can't have her, no one will. Those entries were enough to convince detectives they were dealing with more than just a missing persons case. Rachel Myers was no longer just a concerned friend. She was the prime suspect. The small town of Millbrook buzzed with gossip as news of Rachel's status spread. Residents who had once seen Rachel and Claire as inseparable best friends now whispered about the jealous one, the obsessive friend. Meanwhile, detectives were working around the clock to build a case. They sent the blood samples from Rachel's car to the state lab for DNA analysis. They subpoenaed her phone records, which revealed another chilling detail: Rachel's phone had been pinging off a cell tower near the Millbrook Nature Preserve at 4 a.m. on April 11th. The same night she was seen leaving Claire's driveway. The nature preserve was vast, over 1,000 acres of dense forest, hiking trails, and marshland. If Rachel had gone there after leaving Claire's apartment, investigators needed to know why. Within 48 hours, dozens of officers and volunteers swarmed the preserve. They combed through every trail, every clearing, every inch of brush they could access. K-9 units were brought in, and a dive team searched the preserve's large pond. The search turned up several small clues: a torn piece of fabric matching the shirt Claire had been wearing the night she vanished, and a muddy shoe print near a secluded trailhead that matched the tread of Rachel's sneakers. But Claire herself was nowhere to be found. Rachel was arrested on suspicion of involvement in Claire's disappearance, though she continued to deny any wrongdoing. She sobbed during her booking, telling officers, "I loved her. She was my best friend. I would never hurt her." Detective Simmons wasn't buying it. In an interview later, Simmons said, "Rachel's obsession with Claire was clear. This wasn't just jealousy, it was possession. Rachel saw Claire as hers. When she felt Claire slipping away, she snapped. But suspicion and circumstantial evidence weren't enough. Without Claire's body, without definitive proof, prosecutors knew their case was shaky. The investigation entered a new phase, building a timeline of Rachel and Claire's final hours together. Detectives meticulously pieced together their movements. Claire had been last seen on April 10th, leaving her hospital shift at 7 p.m. She stopped for gas at 7:15 p.m., then texted Tyler around 10 p.m., wishing him luck on his interview the next day. Sometime between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., Rachel arrived at Claire's apartment. Surveillance showed her car leaving at 3:14 a.m., and her phone pinged near the nature preserve shortly after. That narrow window of time was crucial. Detectives theorized that Rachel and Claire had argued, and that something violent had happened in Claire's apartment, or on the way to wherever Rachel went next. Crime scene techs went over Claire's apartment with a fine-tooth comb. Using luminol, they found faint traces of blood on the carpet near the entryway, almost invisible to the naked eye. DNA tests confirmed it belonged to Claire. This discovery shifted the case dramatically. For the residents of Millbrook, the revelation was devastating. The hope that Claire might return alive was fading fast. The Donovan family clung to hope, but Linda Donovan's tearful plea at a press conference revealed her growing despair. "If anyone knows where my daughter is, please, please help us bring her home. She's not just a name on a flyer. She's our everything." Rachel, now sitting in jail awaiting further charges, refused to speak without her attorney. But her silence spoke volumes. Detectives were convinced she held the key to finding Claire. As spring turned to summer, the search for Claire intensified. More resources were poured into the investigation. FBI profilers were brought in, and they confirmed detectives' suspicions. Rachel fit the profile of someone with a deeply obsessive attachment, someone who might harm the person she couldn't control. The profiler's analysis painted a chilling picture. Rachel saw Claire as an extension of herself. Losing Claire meant losing her identity. That mindset, coupled with Rachel's jealousy and feelings of abandonment, made her dangerous. Investigators doubled down on searching the nature preserve, expanding their search perimeter by several miles. They drained sections of the pond and brought in cadaver dogs. Then, in late May, a breakthrough came. A volunteer searcher spotted something glinting in a patch of overgrown brush just off a hiking trail. It was a silver bracelet, a simple chain with a small heart charm. Claire's mother confirmed it was hers. The discovery reignited hope. Search teams focused their efforts on the surrounding area, combing through every inch. What they found next would confirm their worst fears. Detectives traced Rachel Meyer's movements the night Claire Donovan vanished, poring over hours of cell tower data. Piece by piece, they built a digital breadcrumb trail, a chilling map of Rachel's night. At 3:14 a.m., her car was seen leaving Claire's driveway. By 3:40 a.m., her phone pinged off a cell tower on the outskirts of town. At 4:03 a.m., it connected briefly to another tower, this one deep in the woods, near an abandoned hunting cabin that had been in her family for decades. The cabin was remote, so remote that many people in Millbrook didn't even know it existed. It had been built in the late 70s by Rachel's uncle, a reclusive man who had passed away years ago. Since then, it had sat vacant, left to the elements, hidden by overgrown pines and winding dirt roads. To investigators, the location was suspicious. Why would Rachel be driving out there at 4 a.m.? Why would she even have access to the cabin? On a gray April afternoon, a convoy of police cruisers and unmarked vehicles made its way down a narrow dirt road, tires crunching over gravel as the forest closed in around them. The air was thick with tension. Detectives knew this was a turning point. The cabin sat at the end of the road like a secret. Its wooden siding was weathered, the paint peeling, windows boarded over. A rusty padlock dangled from the front door. Vines crept along the walls, and broken branches littered the porch. Officers surrounded the building, weapons drawn, before breaking the lock and stepping inside. The cabin smelled of damp wood and mildew, a stagnant odor that clung to everything. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the boards, casting eerie beams across the dusty floor. At first glance, it looked abandoned, but a closer look told a different story. On a small table near the window sat a single coffee mug, the rim marked with faint lipstick stains. Next to it, neatly folded, was a blood-stained hoodie that matched the description of the one Claire had been wearing the night she vanished. And on the floor, coiled neatly beside the table, was a set of industrial-strength zip ties. The sight of them sent a chill down Detective Laura Simmons' spine. But there was no Claire. Crime scene technicians were called in immediately. They photographed everything, collected samples, and swept the cabin for fingerprints and DNA. The blood on the hoodie was confirmed to be Claire's, though the amount was small, likely a transfer stain, not a sign of a fatal wound. The cabin wasn't just suspicious. It was a crime scene. The discovery only deepened the mystery. Where was Claire? Was she alive? Had she been held there? And if so, when had she been moved? Back at the station, detectives doubled down, reconstructing Rachel's life leading up to that night. They interviewed her co-workers, neighbors, and family. What they learned painted a picture of a woman spiraling out of control. Rachel had been increasingly erratic in the weeks before Claire's disappearance. One co-worker from the diner where she worked described her as moody and obsessive, constantly talking about Claire. She was always bringing her up, the co-worker recalled. She'd get this look in her eyes, like she hated her, but also couldn't stop talking about her. One time, she said she hated how Claire had everything handed to her. Like, she was genuinely angry about it. Detectives also found a series of chilling journal entries that documented Rachel's deteriorating mental state. Some entries were rambling, pages filled with scribbled words and angry thoughts. Others were more coherent, and far more disturbing. One read, "She doesn't even notice me anymore. She has Tyler, school, her perfect family. I'm nothing to her. If she's not around, I won't feel like this anymore. Maybe then I can finally breathe." Another said, "I can't let her leave me. Not like everyone else. I won't let her." These entries made one thing clear: this wasn't just jealousy. This was obsession, an all-consuming fixation that had twisted their friendship into something dangerous. Detectives knew they were close to cracking Rachel. The cabin evidence had given them leverage, and now it was time to use it. They brought her into the interrogation room again. Rachel sat across from Detectives Simmons and Lawson, her arms crossed, her hoodie pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, her hands trembling slightly. Simmons slid photographs of the cabin across the table. "This is where you went that night," Simmons said calmly. "We know you were there. Your phone data puts you at the cabin. Your fingerprints are all over it. And we found Claire's blood." Rachel's face remained blank, but her fingers twitched nervously. "We also found zip ties," Lawson added. "You brought her there, didn't you? You brought Claire to that cabin." Rachel shook her head. "No. You're twisting things. I didn't. I didn't hurt her." Simmons leaned in. "Rachel, we've been doing this a long time. People don't just disappear. You were the last person to see her alive. We know what happened in that cabin. What we need to know is why." Rachel's breathing quickened. Her composure was slipping. For nearly 2 hours, detectives pressed her. They showed her photos of the evidence, the hoodie, the mug, the zip ties. They read excerpts from her journal aloud, letting her own words hang heavy in the air. Rachel's defenses crumbled. She started crying, loud, racking sobs that filled the interrogation room. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered through tears. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Simmons gently slid a box of tissues across the table. "Then tell us what happened, Rachel. Help us find her." There was a long pause. Rachel's breathing slowed. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll tell you where she is." The room went silent. Simmons and Lawson exchanged a brief glance, both recognizing the gravity of what they'd just heard. Rachel leaned forward, her voice trembling. She's in the quarry," she said softly. "I left her there. I didn't know what else to do." Detectives wasted no time. Within minutes, a search team was dispatched to the old Millbrook Quarry, an abandoned site on the edge of town. The quarry had been closed for years, its deep pit filled with murky water and surrounded by thick woods. It was a place teenagers sometimes dared each other to visit at night, but otherwise, it had been largely forgotten. Rachel led them there in the back of a squad car, her hands cuffed, her face pale and expressionless. The convoy of police vehicles wound down a long, gravel road until the trees gave way to a wide clearing. The quarry loomed ahead, its sheer rock walls casting dark shadows over the water below. Officers fanned out with flashlights and search dogs, scanning the overgrown area around the perimeter. The only sounds were the crunch of boots on gravel and the distant calls of birds. Then, about 50 yards from the water's edge, one of the search dogs alerted. In a shallow depression, partially covered with branches and leaves, they found her. Claire Donovan's body was wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and serene in death. She had been gone for weeks, but the cool spring weather had slowed decomposition. Detectives noted bruising on her wrists, consistent with being restrained, and a deep contusion on her head. The scene was silent, heavy with sorrow. Even the most seasoned officers felt the weight of the discovery. Claire wasn't just another victim. She was someone's daughter, someone's best friend, someone's everything. Detective Simmons knelt by the body, her jaw tight. "We've got her," she said softly. News of Claire's discovery shattered the town of Millbrook. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, and flowers piled up outside her apartment and at the quarry's edge. The Donovans were heartbroken, but they finally had closure. Rachel Myers was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Many residents had grown up watching Rachel and Claire together. They were the girls with matching bracelets, the inseparable pair everyone admired. The thought that Rachel had killed Claire out of jealousy and obsession was almost too much to process. In court, prosecutors painted Rachel as a woman consumed by envy. They argued that Rachel had planned the attack, luring Claire into a confrontation that turned deadly. They presented her journal entries, the cabin evidence, and testimony from co-workers who recalled her bitter remarks about Claire. The defense argued that Rachel hadn't planned to kill her friend, that it was an accident during a heated argument. Rachel herself testified, sobbing as she recounted the night of April 11th. According to her version of events, she had gone to Claire's apartment in the middle of the night, desperate to talk. She felt Claire slipping away. Between nursing school, Tyler, and her busy schedule, Rachel feared she'd be left behind. The argument escalated. Rachel claimed she grabbed Claire's arm to stop her from leaving, and in the struggle, Claire fell and hit her head. Panicked, Rachel said she restrained her friend with zip ties, intending to calm her down. She drove her to the cabin, hoping to figure out what to do, but Claire's condition worsened. By the time Rachel realized how badly injured she was, it was too late. Instead of calling for help, Rachel panicked. She wrapped Claire's body in a blanket and drove to the quarry, where she left her. The prosecution argued that Rachel's actions after the fact, hiding the body, cleaning the scene, lying to police, proved premeditation. Her chilling journal entries further solidified their case. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every seat in the courtroom was filled each day, reporters scribbling notes while cameras rolled outside. When the verdict was read, the room was silent. Rachel Myers was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Millbrook, the case left scars that would never fully heal. Claire Donovan was remembered as more than just a victim. Friends and family described her as a bright light, a young woman with a future full of promise. Her nursing classmates organized a scholarship in her name, ensuring that her dream of helping others would live on. Rachel's story, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale about obsession, envy, and the dark side of relationships that appear perfect from the outside. Detective Simmons reflected on the case in an interview years later. "What haunts me isn't just the crime itself, but how long Rachel had been struggling, and how no one realized how deep her obsession ran. Claire saw her as a sister. She never saw it coming. The image of those two little girls with matching bracelets haunted the town. One was gone forever, and the other would spend the rest of her life behind bars. In the end, the story of Claire and Rachel wasn't just about a murder. It was about love twisted into possession, friendship turned into fixation. And it was a stark reminder that sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones capable of hurting us the deepest. Rachel Meyer's confession painted a portrait of betrayal so chilling that even the most seasoned detectives struggled to shake it. For weeks, investigators had pieced together fragments of evidence, cell tower data, bloody clothing, cryptic journal entries, but nothing prepared them for Rachel's own words. In the sterile interrogation room, with a single camera recording her every movement, Rachel recounted that April night in painstaking detail. She wasn't hysterical or rambling. Her tone was almost calm, detached, as if she were reliving a memory she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind. It began, Rachel said, like any other night between best friends. She texted Claire, suggesting a girls' night, something they hadn't done in a while. She showed up at Claire's apartment with a bottle of red wine, a bag of chips, and a few old DVDs they used to watch in high school. Claire greeted her with a warm smile. Despite the tension that had been building between them in recent weeks, Claire had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. They poured glasses of wine, curled up on the couch, and reminisced about their teenage years, their late-night swims at the lake house, the inside jokes only they understood, the endless plans they'd once made for the future. Rachel admitted she'd been smiling and laughing on the outside. But inside, her emotions churned like a storm. Watching Claire laugh so freely, seeing her happy and confident, only deepened the dark pit of resentment that had been festering for years. She didn't even notice, Rachel said quietly. She didn't notice that I was angry. She didn't notice that I was hurting. She never did. As the night wore on, Claire began packing a small suitcase for an upcoming weekend trip with her boyfriend, Tyler. Rachel offered to help, folding clothes and chatting casually. But every mention of Tyler's name, every glimpse of Claire's perfectly planned life, was like gasoline on a fire. Rachel's thoughts spiraled. In her mind, Claire was slipping away. Soon, she would be gone for good, leaving Rachel behind to drown in her loneliness. While Claire went to grab another glass from the kitchen, Rachel made her move. She reached for a heavy candlestick sitting on the side table, a decorative piece Claire had bought at a local boutique. When Claire returned, Rachel swung it with all her strength, striking her friend on the back of the head. The sound of the blow, Rachel said, was sickening. Claire collapsed instantly, her body crumpling to the floor. "I didn't even think," Rachel whispered, her hands trembling as she spoke. "It just happened." Rachel worked quickly, almost mechanically. She tied Claire's wrists and ankles with zip ties she'd brought in her bag, gagged her with a scarf, and dragged her unconscious friend to the car. She laid Claire across the back seat, covering her with a blanket. Then, under the cover of darkness, she drove out of town. The narrow road to the cabin was one Rachel knew well from childhood trips with her uncle. The cabin had always been a safe haven for her, a place where she could escape the world. That night, it became a prison. Rachel recounted arriving at the cabin and carrying Claire inside, laying her on the dusty wooden floor. She lit a lantern and sat across from her, staring at her unconscious friend for what felt like hours. When Claire eventually stirred, confusion and fear filled her eyes. She struggled against the restraints, muffled cries escaping through the gag. Rachel said she tried to calm her down, insisting she just wanted to talk. But what followed wasn't a conversation. It was an interrogation. Rachel ranted about feeling invisible, about always being the shadow, while Claire was the star. She accused Claire of abandoning her, of choosing Tyler and nursing school over their lifelong friendship. "She looked at me like I was a stranger," Rachel said softly, tears streaming down her face. "Like she didn't even recognize me anymore. That hurt more than anything. Rachel claimed she planned to let Claire go once she felt heard, once Claire understood the pain she'd caused. But fear had taken over Claire. She continued to fight, twisting against her restraints, desperately trying to free herself. At one point, she managed to loosen the gag and scream for help. That scream, Rachel said, snapped something inside her. She wouldn't listen, Rachel said through sobs. She just kept screaming. I panicked. I thought if she screamed, someone would find us, and then I'd lose her forever. In a fit of rage and fear, Rachel wrapped her hands around Claire's throat. The struggle was brief but brutal. Rachel strangled Claire as tears streamed down her face, repeating, I'm sorry, over and over. When it was over, Claire lay still, her wide eyes staring up at the cabin ceiling. Rachel collapsed beside her, shaking and sobbing. After the murder, Rachel said she felt numb. She sat with Claire's body for hours, unable to comprehend what she'd done. I thought she'd wake up, Rachel whispered. I thought maybe she wasn't really gone. But she was. As dawn approached, Rachel made a decision. She dragged Claire's lifeless body outside and dug a shallow grave behind the cabin. Using branches and leaves, she covered the disturbed earth, hoping it would blend into the forest floor. She then returned to Claire's apartment, cleaned up the blood, and staged the scene to make it look like Claire had left in a hurry. She left Claire's phone on the nightstand, her purse on the chair, and locked the door behind her. From that moment on, Rachel carried the weight of her crime like a ghost. She went to work, posted on social media, even pretended to help with the search. But deep down, she knew the truth would eventually come out. Detectives sat in stunned silence as Rachel's confession came to an end. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I just wanted her to see me. I just wanted her to love me like I loved her. To Detective Simmons, Rachel's words were chilling, not because of the violence, but because of the twisted logic behind them. Rachel didn't see herself as a killer. She saw herself as a victim. The case shook Millbrook to its core. News of Rachel's confession spread quickly, dominating headlines and sparking heated conversations across the country. How could a friendship so seemingly perfect end in murder? How had no one seen the warning signs? Reporters dug into Rachel's life, uncovering a history of insecurity and abandonment. Her father had left when she was a child. She'd struggled in school, never quite fitting in. Claire had been her anchor, her one constant. Over time, that dependence turned toxic. Psychologists who analyzed the case described Rachel's behavior as a textbook example of pathological attachment. She saw Claire not as a separate person but as an extension of herself. When Claire's independence threatened that bond, Rachel's fear of abandonment morphed into rage. Rachel didn't just lose a friend, one expert explained. She lost her identity. And that loss triggered violence. In the months that followed, Millbrook tried to heal. Claire's funeral drew hundreds of mourners, many of them wearing purple ribbons in her memory. Her classmates organized a candlelight vigil, where professors and students shared stories about her kindness and determination. She wanted to save lives, one nursing instructor said tearfully. She would have been an incredible nurse. She already was. The Donovan family established the Claire Donovan Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic and interpersonal violence. They hoped her story would prevent others from suffering in silence. Rachel's trial became one of the most closely watched cases in Michigan history. Prosecutors presented her confession, the physical evidence, and her chilling journal entries. One prosecutor held up a page from Rachel's diary during closing arguments, reading aloud. If she's not around, I won't feel like this anymore. The words echoed through the courtroom like a ghost. Rachel's defense team argued that the killing wasn't premeditated, that Rachel had snapped during a moment of emotional turmoil. But the evidence told a different story. The zip ties, the remote location of the cabin, and Rachel's actions afterward painted a picture of careful planning. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. Rachel Myers was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing hearing was emotional. Claire's mother, Linda, stood before the judge, clutching a photo of her daughter. Claire saw the good in everyone, she said, her voice trembling. She believed Rachel was her sister. She trusted her. And that trust cost her life. Rachel sobbed quietly as Linda spoke, her face buried in her hands. Tyler, Claire's boyfriend, addressed the court next. His voice was steady but filled with grief. "I lost the love of my life," he said. "And for what? Jealousy? Obsession? I'll never understand how someone could hurt Claire. She deserved the world." Even after the trial, the case haunted Millbrook. The cabin where Claire's life ended was torn down, but locals said the area felt heavy for years afterward. Parents became more cautious, friendships were viewed through a lens of suspicion, and the once quiet town found itself forever tied to a tragedy that captivated the nation. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials dissected the case, often focusing on Rachel's psyche. Was she a monster? A victim of her own mental illness? Or both? For Detective Simmons, who had worked the case from day one, the answer was clear. Rachel made a choice, Simmons said in a later interview. She planned this. She thought about it. And then she executed it. That's not a momentary lapse. That's murder. Years later, Claire's story continues to resonate. Her foundation has raised thousands of dollars for mental health awareness and violence prevention. Her family speaks at schools and universities, urging students to recognize the warning signs of toxic relationships, not just romantic ones, but friendships too. Rachel remains in a maximum security prison, serving her life sentence. Former cellmates describe her as quiet, withdrawn, and deeply remorseful. She rarely speaks to anyone, spending most of her time writing letters she never sends. Some speculate she writes to Claire. The image of those two girls with matching bracelets lingers in the minds of those who followed the case. What began as a childhood bond, a friendship that seemed unbreakable, ended in one of the most shocking crimes Millbrook had ever seen. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It shattered the trust that defines friendship and left a scar on an entire community. The case serves as a grim reminder. Sometimes, the people closest to us carry the darkest secrets. The final act of this story began not with a gavel, but with the steady hum of excavation equipment cutting through the cold Michigan air. On a gray April morning, police officers, forensic experts, and a small army of local volunteers gathered in grim silence behind the abandoned cabin. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the wind like a warning to stay away. A detective's gloved hand pointed to a patch of disturbed earth. The soil, though carefully covered with branches and dead leaves, was looser, softer than the ground around it. Shovels struck the dirt. Cameras clicked. No one spoke. And then, a single shoe emerged. The excavation team froze. The shoe was small, pale pink, speckled with dirt, and instantly recognizable to Claire's mother when she saw the crime scene photos later. It was one of her daughter's favorites. That was all the confirmation they needed. A few hours later, Claire Donovan's body was lifted from the shallow grave Rachel Myers had described in chilling detail. She was exactly where Rachel said she would be, lying just a few feet from a rotting tree stump, her body carefully but hastily covered. The grim discovery shattered any lingering hope Millbrook had been clinging to. For a brief, fragile moment, some believed Claire might still be alive, hidden away somewhere, waiting for rescue. That hope died in the woods that morning. The murder of Claire Donovan shook Millbrook to its core, but the trial of Rachel Myers turned the sleepy town into the epicenter of national attention. Reporters lined up outside the courthouse, their satellite trucks parked along Main Street. Local diners that had once been quiet gathering spots were now buzzing with gossip, theories, and debates about Rachel's motives. Rachel entered the courtroom on the first day of her trial in a pale blue blouse and black slacks, clothing chosen carefully by her defense team to soften her image. But no amount of wardrobe coordination could erase the coldness in her expression. When the jury looked at her, they didn't see a monster in chains, they saw a woman who could easily be their own neighbor, their daughter's childhood friend. That was what made this case so terrifying. The prosecution wasted no time in painting Rachel as a manipulative, calculating killer. They presented the timeline. The zip ties purchased weeks before Claire's disappearance. The late-night drive to the remote cabin. The journal entries dripping with resentment and obsession. Assistant Prosecutor Ellen Carver stood before the jury with a large evidence board displaying Rachel's own words in bold black letters. "If she's not around, I won't feel like this anymore." This was not a crime of passion, Carver said, her voice sharp. This was a crime of planning. Rachel Myers had weeks to change her mind. She didn't. She had hours in that cabin to stop. She didn't. She made a choice, and that choice was to kill her best friend. Rachel's defense attorney, James Weller, tried to shift the narrative. He described Rachel as a troubled young woman battling mental illness, a person who snapped under the weight of emotional turmoil. He argued that Rachel never intended to kill Claire, that this was a tragic accident born out of panic and fear. But the evidence told a different story. The candlestick, the bindings, the carefully staged apartment, all of it pointed to intent. And then came Rachel's taped confession. The courtroom went silent as Rachel's voice filled the speakers. Her tone was calm, almost unnervingly so, as she recounted every horrific detail of that night. She described the blow to Claire's head, the zip ties, the screaming, the strangulation. When the recording played Rachel's voice whispering, "I just wanted her to see me," several jurors visibly flinched. Claire's parents sat motionless in the front row, their faces pale but resolute. It was one of the most haunting moments of the trial. Rachel herself took the stand on the sixth day of the trial. She spoke softly, avoiding eye contact with Claire's family. She admitted to killing Claire but claimed she never meant for it to go that far. The prosecutor pressed her. "Did you bring zip ties with you that night?" "Yes." "Did you drive her to a cabin miles away from town?" "Yes." "And when she begged for her life, you strangled her?" Rachel hesitated. She wouldn't stop screaming, she whispered. Her words sent a ripple of horror through the courtroom. Rachel showed flashes of emotion, crying at times, wringing her hands, but never once apologized. Even during her final statement to the court, she looked directly at the judge and said, "I just wanted her to see me. That's all I ever wanted." Not once did she say Claire's name. It took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read, Claire's father closed his eyes and gripped his wife's hand. Rachel, meanwhile, stared blankly at the table in front of her, as if the words didn't quite register. The judge delivered a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was the harshest punishment Michigan law allowed. "Your actions were calculated, cold, and devastating," Judge Patricia Morales said sternly. "You not only ended Claire Donovan's life, but you also destroyed the trust of a community. You will spend the rest of your life reflecting on that choice." Rachel showed no reaction. Throughout the trial, Claire's parents never missed a single day. They sat through every gruesome detail, every photograph, every piece of evidence. Their silence spoke louder than words. When given the chance to address the court, Claire's mother, Linda, clutched a framed photo of her daughter. "Claire was light," she said softly. "She believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. She believed Rachel was her sister. She trusted her. And that trust cost her life." Tyler, Claire's boyfriend, stood next. His voice trembled, but his anger was palpable. "Rachel, I hope you hear me when I say this," he said, turning to face her directly. "You didn't just take Claire from me. You took my future. You took every dream we had. And for what? Because you couldn't stand that she was happy?" Rachel didn't lift her head. Months after Rachel's sentencing, the cabin where Claire spent her final hours was demolished. The land was cleared, the dirt smoothed over, and the area reseeded with grass. But locals still refused to go near those woods. Parents warn their children not to play there. Hunters avoid the area entirely. Some say the woods feel heavier now, as if they carry the weight of what happened. There are some places, one local man told a news crew, that never stop whispering. The story of Claire and Rachel isn't just another entry in a true crime documentary. For the people of Millbrook, it's a cautionary tale carved into their collective memory. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the people we love the most, the ones we trust without question. Rachel wasn't a nameless killer lurking in the dark. She was the girl at every birthday party, the friend in every school photo, the person Claire trusted with her secrets. And that betrayal made her crime all the more chilling. In the aftermath of her death, Claire's family created the Claire Donovan Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to raising awareness about toxic relationships, romantic, familial, and platonic. The foundation provides counseling services, mental health resources, and educational programs for schools. Claire's story is now told across the country, not just as a tragedy but as a call to action. "Claire's death won't be in vain," Linda Donovan said at a candlelight vigil. "We will make sure her light keeps shining." Rachel now spends her days in a maximum security prison, serving her life sentence. Guards describe her as quiet, withdrawn, and deeply isolated. She rarely speaks to other inmates, spending most of her time in the library or writing letters she never sends. Some speculate she writes to Claire. "She's haunted," one former inmate told a journalist. "You can see it in her eyes. She knows she'll never get out, but I don't think she cares anymore. She's already in her own prison." Years later, people still talk about Claire and Rachel. True crime podcasts analyze every detail. Documentaries dissect Rachel's psyche. Social media users post old photos of the two girls, wondering aloud how such a perfect friendship turned deadly. But for those who lived through it, this isn't just a story. It's a scar. When Millbrook residents drive past the now empty field where the cabin once stood, they remember the headlines, the police tape, and the heartbreak. Parents use Claire's story as a warning to their children: trust is precious, and sometimes dangerous. Claire's name lives on through her foundation, through the nurses she inspired, and through the community that refuses to forget her. Rachel's name lives on, too, not as a friend, but as a reminder that love twisted by obsession can become deadly. The woods may be quiet now, but their silence is deafening. And for the town of Millbrook, one truth will always linger like a shadow. Sometimes, the greatest danger comes from the person sitting right beside you.
Welcome. If you crave chilling true crime stories, real mysteries, and twists you'll never see coming, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and join a community that never looks away from the truth. Because every week, we shine a light where others won't. Are you ready? Let's begin. Echo Falls, Oregon, was the kind of town that seemed untouchable. Tucked between endless pine forests and winding creeks, it felt immune to the chaos of the outside world. People left their cars running at the gas station while they ran inside for coffee. Porch lights glowed through the night, not as warnings, but as quiet beacons of hospitality. But everything changed on the night of September 12, 2019. At exactly 10:43 p.m., the Echo Falls Police Department received a 911 call that would unravel the illusion of safety forever. The dispatcher's recording still chills even the most hardened investigators. A young woman's voice, trembling, gasping for breath. "He's in the house. Please, don't." Then, a muffled crash. A clatter, as if something heavy toppled over. And then silence. The line went dead. When officers arrived minutes later at 112 Pine Shadow Lane, the Whitmore residence, they found the front door half open, swaying with the night breeze. Inside was chaos. The living room looked as though a hurricane had passed through. A lamp was shattered across the carpet. Couch cushions were slashed open, feathers spilling like snow. On the hardwood floor, dark smears of blood stretched in frantic patterns toward the hallway. Anna's cell phone lay in pieces by the staircase, its glass screen cracked like ice. But Anna herself was gone. The Whitmores weren't strangers to Echo Falls. Anna was the youngest daughter of Tom and Margaret Whitmore, both respected in town. Tom owned the only hardware store for 20 miles. Margaret worked at the library. The family was well-liked, known for their kindness, their stability. Anna, at 19, had just started her freshman year at Echo Falls Community College. She was ambitious, bright, and fiercely independent. Friends described her as the kind of girl who dreamed big but never forgot where she came from. She had plans to transfer to Oregon State within 2 years, maybe even pursue journalism. Now, her name was on every neighbor's lips, whispered in fear. The town reacted instantly. Echo Falls had always prided itself on being safe. Parents who never thought twice about letting their kids bike after dark suddenly enforced strict curfews. Grocery stores reported a run on locks, deadbolts, and motion sensor lights. One local hardware clerk recalled that within 48 hours, they sold out of padlocks for the first time in decades. But beneath the surface, another question gnawed at everyone's minds. Was this the work of an outsider? A drifter passing through the forests? Or worse, was Anna's abductor someone from Echo Falls itself? Detective Harold Mercer was assigned lead investigator on the case. Mercer was in his late 40s, a man with sharp eyes and a reputation for patience. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but he noticed details others missed. He arrived at the Whitmore residence just after midnight, walking through the front door with latex gloves pulled tight over his hands. What struck him first wasn't the violence. It was the silence. The house felt suspended in time, as though the chaos had been frozen the moment Anna vanished. The faint smell of iron hung in the air. Upstairs, the family dog, a golden retriever named Daisy, whimpered from inside a locked bedroom. Mercer crouched near the blood smears. They weren't a single pool, but erratic streaks, evidence of a struggle. Someone had been dragged, but there was no body. And strangely, no forced entry. Whoever had entered the Whitmore home had been let inside. The first wave of interviews painted a complicated picture of Anna's life. Her parents described her as cautious, the kind of girl who always double-checked that the doors were locked when home alone. Her friends, however, offered another perspective. Anna had recently started dating again after a difficult breakup the year before. Rumors swirled about late-night texts, secret meetups, and a relationship her parents might not have known about. One friend, Maya Ellison, revealed something chilling. 2 weeks before Anna vanished, she confided in Maya that she felt someone was watching her. She told me she'd see shadows near her window, Maya recalled. Like someone was standing outside at night, just staring. At the time, Anna brushed it off as paranoia. But after the disappearance, the memory took on new weight. Had Anna been stalked? As the days passed with no sign of Anna, Echo Falls began to fracture under the weight of fear. Neighbors who once shared meals now eyed each other with suspicion. Every unfamiliar truck or van was reported to police. The sheriff's office was flooded with tips, most of them dead ends, strangers passing through town, late-night noises, mysterious figures spotted near the woods. But Mercer remained focused on one question. If there was no forced entry, who did Anna trust enough to let inside? Investigators pieced together Anna's final hours from text logs, security cameras, and witness statements. On September 12th, she spent the day at classes before stopping at the library, where her mother worked, around 6 p.m. The two chatted briefly, nothing unusual. By 7 o'clock, Anna was home. At 8:15, her phone records show a brief call with Maya Ellison. They talked about an upcoming exam. Maya described Anna as a little distracted, like she was waiting for something. At 9:40, Anna texted another friend. "Can't talk now. Someone's coming over." The friend asked who. Anna never replied. By 10:43, her 911 call was placed. In less than an hour, Anna had gone from safe in her home to vanished. Mercer's team uncovered several puzzling details. First, the blood in the hallway. DNA confirmed it belonged to Anna. But the trail stopped abruptly, as though it had been wiped clean or the victim lifted off the ground. Second, the shattered phone. The damage suggested it had been thrown against the wall, perhaps during a struggle. Yet the SIM card was missing, deliberately removed. Finally, the dog. Daisy had been locked upstairs. Whoever entered the house took the time to shut the retriever away, preventing her from interfering. This wasn't random violence. This was deliberate, planned. By the 1-week mark, Echo Falls felt unrecognizable. Candlelight vigils filled the town square. Posters of Anna's smiling face were plastered across every pole and storefront. Volunteers searched the forests in coordinated sweeps, but no trace was found. Theories spiraled out of control. Some whispered about a serial killer passing through Oregon. Others swore they'd seen suspicious figures near the old lumber mill. And then there were darker theories, that someone from within the Whitmore family knew more than they were admitting. Detective Mercer said it best in a press conference. Someone out there knows what happened to Anna Whitmore. And until they come forward, Echo Falls will never sleep soundly again. 5 days after Anna vanished, her best friend, Maya Torres, was alone in her bedroom when her phone buzzed. The screen displayed unknown caller. She hesitated. When she answered, at first, there was only silence. The faint sound of breathing on the other end. "Maya," she whispered. "Who is this?" Then, a distorted voice. Mechanical, warped, almost inhuman. "Do you miss her?" Maya's heart froze. The voice went on. It mentioned things no stranger could possibly know. The stuffed rabbit Anna had brought to every sleepover since she was 10. The secret hideout in the woods they called the Fort. The nickname Anna's late father had given her, Starling. These weren't random details. Whoever this was knew Anna, knew her intimately. Before Maya could respond, the caller hung up. It didn't stop there. Over the next week, more people in Echo Falls began receiving calls. Teenagers, parents, even Officer Ryan Hale, one of the first cops on the scene at the Whitmore house. Each call followed the same eerie pattern. Silence at first, then a distorted voice revealing pieces of private conversations, family secrets, even things people thought only Anna herself knew. And every call ended the same way, with a promise that made stomachs drop. "One of you will be next." The town, already fragile, now spiraled into hysteria. Local news stations swarmed the story. By the time regional and national outlets picked it up, Echo Falls was branded with a new name. The Town of the Phantom. Reporters camped outside the Whitmore home, outside the police station, even following Maya to class. For a town that had once thrived on anonymity, Echo Falls was now the center of a nightmare broadcast across America. Detective Harold Mercer studied every detail of the calls. Phone records showed the numbers were spoofed, bouncing across towers and masking their origin. But what unsettled Mercer most was the specificity. The Phantom didn't just taunt. They demonstrated access. Privileged access. When a call went out to Sheriff Emily Gaines, the Phantom recited word for word the argument she'd had with her husband the night before, inside their own home, with no one else present. This wasn't just a prank. This was surveillance. Echo Falls began to unravel. Teenagers stopped answering their phones. Parents pulled kids from school. The once bustling coffee shop downtown now sat half empty, its regulars too paranoid to linger in public. Neighbors turned on each other. Some believed the Phantom had to be local, someone who'd grown up in town, someone who knew their lives inside and out. Rumors flared. Was it a jealous ex? A spurned classmate? Even a former teacher? Others whispered about something darker. That Anna herself was still alive. That she was calling them. By now, national networks had seized on the story. Anchors speculated about the Phantom of Echo Falls, turning the case into a media spectacle. Talk shows debated whether Anna had been abducted, killed, or was part of the calls herself. A cable news segment even replayed the audio from Maya's call, digitally cleaned by experts. The warped, robotic tone bled through living rooms across the country, followed by the haunting whisper, "Do you miss her?" That clip alone racked up millions of views online. And for the people of Echo Falls, it wasn't just a story. It was their reality. No one bore the weight more than Maya Torres. Already crushed by grief, she now found herself at the center of the Phantom's cruel game. Friends avoided her, afraid the calls would spread to them. Her own parents begged her to shut off her phone, but she refused. "What if Anna tries to reach me?" she told detectives. "What if she's alive, and this is her way of telling me. Mercer wanted to believe her, but deep down, he feared something else, that the phantom wasn't Anna reaching out. It was someone exploiting her memory, someone savoring the torment. Then came the first escalation. A local shopkeeper, Howard Lane, received a call late one evening as he was closing his store. The phantom whispered, "You left the back door unlocked. Daisy is inside." Howard froze. Daisy was his daughter's cat, and when he rushed home in panic, he found the back door ajar. The cat was missing. Hours later, Daisy turned up inside the Whitmore family's mailbox. Unharmed, but shaken. The message was clear. The phantom wasn't just making calls. They were here, in Echo Falls, watching. Detective Mercer held a press conference. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. This is not a game. Whoever is responsible for these calls is committing a serious crime. We urge the public not to answer unknown numbers and to report any contact immediately. We are doing everything we can to identify this individual. But Mercer knew the truth. The phantom was always one step ahead. And now, the entire town was playing by their rules. For 3 long weeks, Echo Falls lived in suspended terror. The phantom's calls had turned neighbors against each other, and the unanswered questions still haunted every conversation. Where was Anna Whitmore? The town hoped she was alive, clinging to the faintest chance of rescue. But those hopes shattered one cold October morning. It was 2 hikers who stumbled across her. They'd been cutting through the overgrown trails near the abandoned Echo Falls sawmill, a decaying monument of the town's past, long shuttered and left to rot. There, in a clearing of broken glass and rusted machinery, they saw her. Anna Whitmore, 19 years old. Her body bore the brutal signature of rage, multiple stab wounds across her chest and abdomen. Her skin was pale, her clothes torn. Beside her, half buried in pine needles, lay a mask. Not porcelain, not ornate, but cheap, plastic, the kind you'd find in a bargain bin around Halloween. It was smeared with Anna's blood. When word spread, the fragile line between fear and paranoia snapped. Echo Falls erupted. If the phantom's calls had divided the town, Anna's death fractured it completely. People no longer whispered suspicions, they shouted them. Some pointed to Ethan Reyes, Anna's ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been messy, public. He was jealous, controlling, prone to sudden outbursts. More than one witness recalled heated arguments between them in the months before her disappearance. Others turned their suspicion toward Maya Torres, Anna's so-called best friend. Rumors spread that their friendship had soured, that Anna had been pulling away, leaving Maya desperate, resentful, maybe even violent. After all, Maya was the first to get a call. Coincidence or guilt? And then there was Officer Daniel Price, a young patrol officer, eager, ambitious. He'd been one of the first on the scene the night Anna vanished. Too fast, some argued, almost as if he'd known what he would find. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a suspect. Detective Harold Mercer knew the town's patience was running thin. Pressure mounted from the community, the press, and even state authorities to produce results. So when a search warrant for Ethan Reyes' car turned up something damning, Mercer made his move. In the trunk, hidden under a pile of gym clothes, was a mask. Cheap plastic, identical to the one found beside Anna's body. Within hours, Ethan was in custody. The town exhaled briefly. A killer had been caught. Justice was within reach. But not everyone was convinced. Ethan swore his innocence, claiming the mask had been planted. "You think I'd be that stupid?" he told police during interrogation. "You think I'd keep that in my car, with everyone watching me? This is a setup." Most dismissed it as desperation, until the calls began again. Just days after Ethan's arrest, the phones rang again. Unknown number. Distorted voice. "You got the wrong man." This time, the phantom wasn't just taunting. They were laughing. Calls flooded the town once more. Each one proof that whoever had tormented Echo Falls was still out there. For the people of Echo Falls, the betrayal cut deep. They had believed, if only for a moment, that the nightmare was over, that Anna's killer sat behind bars. Now, doubt poisoned everything. Had the police bungled the case? Had Detective Mercer rushed to make an arrest under pressure? Or was the phantom someone even closer, someone who enjoyed watching the town turn on itself? Parents withdrew their children from school. Businesses shuttered early. The woods around the sawmill were declared off-limits, though teenagers dared each other to sneak in at night. Every mask in town, Halloween decorations, party supplies, even the kind worn at school plays, became symbols of terror. Stores pulled them from shelves. Bonfires were held to burn them in heaps. The Phantom had given Echo Falls a new icon, and the town couldn't escape it. Behind bars, Ethan Reyes became both a villain and a martyr. Half the town was convinced of his guilt. The jealous ex, the violent outbursts, the mask in his car. It fit too neatly to ignore. But the other half began to question. Reporters dug into his past and found little beyond normal teenage recklessness. Friends swore he loved Anna, even after their breakup. Some insisted he was incapable of murder. And then there was the undeniable fact: the calls hadn't stopped. If Ethan was the Phantom, how were they still calling? Detective Mercer couldn't sleep. The case gnawed at him. Yes, Ethan was volatile. Yes, the evidence seemed damning. But Mercer couldn't shake the feeling that it was too convenient, too clean. He replayed the calls over and over, studying the cadence of the Phantom's words, the pauses, the choice of details. He pored over surveillance footage, phone records, witness statements. And always, the same question haunted him. Who knew Anna well enough to wear her secrets like a second skin? By late October, Echo Falls had transformed into something unrecognizable. What had once been a sleepy timber town was now a community living behind locked doors and drawn curtains. Halloween, once a cherished event, was canceled. Parents wouldn't let children walk the streets. The fear of masks, the Phantom's masks, made even costumes a threat. But in the shadows, someone thrived. The Phantom wasn't finished. The calls were just the beginning. By the time October 31st arrived, Echo Falls was a town on the edge of collapse. Anna's body had been found. Ethan sat in jail. The Phantom's calls still echoed in the night. And yet, life tried to continue. For generations, the Echo Falls Fall Festival had been the centerpiece of Halloween. A night of hayrides, pumpkin carving, cider stands, and the famous corn maze that stretched across the old Miller farm. Canceling it would mean admitting defeat, that the Phantom had stripped the town of its last shred of normalcy. So, reluctantly, the festival went on. Hundreds came. Parents clutched children's hands. Teenagers roamed in groups, constantly looking over their shoulders. Police officers patrolled every corner. It was supposed to be a night of fragile healing. Instead, it became a nightmare. At exactly 8:32 p.m., just as the high school band wrapped up their performance, the lights went out. The entire fairground plunged into darkness. Screams cut through the October air. Somewhere, glass shattered. A generator sputtered and died. Then movement. Figures emerged. Dozens of them, each wearing the same cheap, plastic mask. Identical to the one found beside Anna's body. Identical to the one that had come to define the Phantom. At first, people thought it was a prank. Teenagers playing dress-up, mocking the tragedy. But then the masked figures moved closer. Surrounding, blending into the crowd. Silent, faceless, impossible to count. Someone shoved. Someone screamed, "Run!" Chaos erupted. Families bolted toward the exits, trampling one another in the rush. Children sobbed as they were pulled through the crowd. Food stands toppled. A Ferris wheel screeched to a halt mid-rotation, stranding passengers in the air. The masked figures didn't attack outright. They just were. Their presence alone was enough to ignite hysteria. But somewhere in the confusion, violence did break out. Knives flashed, blood spilled, and the Phantom's legend grew darker. In the frenzy, Maya Torres was separated from her friends. She stumbled into the corn maze, stalks towering above her, their rustling drowned by distant screams. Her chest heaved as she tried to find her way out, but every path twisted back into itself. Then, a crunch of footsteps behind her. She turned, a masked figure. It lunged. Maya fought back, clawing, kicking, until her hands found the mask. She ripped it free, and froze. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't the Phantom. It was Anna. Anna's face was pale, streaked with blood. Her eyes were wide, wild, unrecognizable. For weeks, she had been mourned. Her body had been found. She had been buried. And yet, here she stood, alive, breathing, and holding a knife. Maya's voice cracked. "Anna? Oh my God, it's you." Anna leaned in close, her voice trembling, almost broken. "I had to. They made me." Before Maya could react, Anna shoved her to the ground and bolted, vanishing into the dark labyrinth of corn. When word spread through Echo Falls that Anna had been seen alive, The entire town convulsed in disbelief. The body in the woods, the blood on the mask, the funeral. Had it all been staged? If Anna was alive, then who was buried in her place? And, perhaps most chilling of all, who were they? By the time the power returned, the fairgrounds were a war zone. Dozens injured, 3 dead. Masked figures had scattered into the night, some unmasked as local teenagers caught in the frenzy, others disappearing without a trace. But the question burned hotter than ever. Was Anna the phantom? Or was she just another pawn in a much larger game? Detective Mercer, already battered by weeks of failure, now faced the unthinkable. He had seen Anna's corpse with his own eyes, or what he thought was Anna's corpse. DNA tests had confirmed it. The coroner had filed the report. And yet Maya, terrified and shaking, swore she had seen her best friend alive. Swore she had touched her, heard her voice, looked into her eyes. Either the town had buried the wrong girl, or Anna Whitmore had risen from the dead. In the days following Halloween, the calls escalated. No longer just taunts, they were orchestrated, coordinated. Some calls went to survivors of the festival, replaying the sound of their own screams. Others described, in chilling detail, the deaths that had occurred in the blackout. And one call, received by Mercer himself, contained only a single phrase, whispered in that distorted voice. She chose us. Echo Falls would never be the same. For weeks, the town had lived in fear of an outsider, some faceless monster lurking in the woods, hunting its daughters, tormenting its people. But the truth, when it came, was worse. The monster wasn't an outsider. It had been home all along. After the Halloween night massacre, Detective Harold Mercer doubled down on the case. The chaos of masked attackers, the blackout, and Maya's chilling encounter in the corn maze forced him to confront what no one wanted to believe. Anna Whitmore was alive. He ordered the body exhumed. The girl buried under Anna's name. The DNA tests. The autopsy. And with each discovery, the nightmare unraveled. The corpse wasn't Anna at all. The DNA didn't match. The girl had never been identified. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to convince Echo Falls that Anna was dead. But who could have staged something so elaborate? The answer came from a place Mercer least expected, Anna's own home. In her bedroom, hidden beneath loose floorboards, investigators uncovered journals. Dozens of them. Leather-bound, spiral-bound, some written in neat cursive, others in frantic, jagged scrawl. Inside was a roadmap to terror. Anna wrote of her obsession with horror films, Halloween, Scream, Friday the 13th. Pages filled with sketches of masks, notes on slasher tropes, diagrams of how victims should be discovered for maximum shock value. But beneath the fangirl admiration was something darker. She wrote about feeling invisible, about Echo Falls suffocating her, about wanting, no, needing, to be remembered. I won't be another nameless girl from a nowhere town. I'll be the story they whisper about forever. And then, scrawled across entire pages in black ink, one recurring phrase. The final girl. But Anna hadn't acted alone. Cell tower pings, surveillance footage, and witness statements eventually tied the threads together to Liam Whitmore, Anna's stepbrother. Quiet, reserved, overshadowed, Liam had been the perfect accomplice. While Anna spun fantasies of becoming a legend, Liam provided the logistics. He spoofed the phone numbers for the Phantom's calls. He crept through windows to eavesdrop, gathering secrets to use later. He planted the mask in Ethan's car. And when Anna wavered, when the game seemed too real, Liam was the one who pushed it further. It was Liam who insisted a body was needed for authenticity. It was Liam who found a drifter, lured her, and left her corpse by the sawmill. And it was Liam who drove the knife into Anna herself to make her wounds believable. Anna had wanted a performance. Liam gave her a massacre. The question remained, why? Why terrorize a town? Why destroy lives? The answer lay in the journals. Fame, control, immortality. Anna's words spelled it out. People forget small towns, but they never forget a legend. We'll be the legends of Echo Falls. Our names will live forever. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming unforgettable. The plan was supposed to end differently. Anna would survive. She'd emerge bloodied but alive, the final girl. The town would rally around her. She'd give interviews, sell her story, maybe even write a book. Instead, Maya ripped off her mask. The illusion shattered. The performance collapsed. And the legend curdled into horror. On November 3rd, Anna and Liam Whitmore were taken into custody. Anna wept as she was led away, her once bright eyes vacant, her wrists cuffed. Liam, by contrast, smirked at the cameras, as if the attention itself was victory. When asked by reporters if he regretted what they'd done, he said only, "You'll never forget us." He was right. The fallout was catastrophic. Parents pulled their children from schools. Families moved away, unwilling to live in a place that had birthed such darkness. The abandoned sawmill, already a scar, was torn down entirely. Developers refused to touch the land. Locals said it was cursed, and the phrase, "the phantom," became a permanent scar in the town's history, a reminder that evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it grows in the house next door. Years later, long after Anna and Liam had been sentenced, long after Echo Falls tried to erase its trauma, one truth remained. The scariest part wasn't the masks. It wasn't the phone calls. It wasn't even the blood spilled on the sawmill floor. It was this: the monsters came from within.
It began on an ordinary evening in a quiet American town in the late 1980s. The kind of evening so unremarkable that, for most people, it would have faded from memory within days. But for the people who lived there, and especially for one young man named Marcus Johnson, that night would never be forgotten. The streets were dim, bathed in the orange glow of the tall street lamps that buzzed faintly when the air grew too humid. The sidewalks were cracked from years of winters, small weeds forcing their way through the gaps in concrete, stubborn and untamed. A light breeze rattled the branches of sycamore trees that lined the street. From the outside, everything about this night seemed safe, routine, even comforting. Families sat inside their homes watching television, windows glowing faintly with the blue tint of static-filled screens. Radios played softly in kitchens. The town was winding down, the way small American towns always did after sundown. But somewhere along those quiet streets, danger was waiting. A young woman, a 21-year-old college student, had just finished a long study session at the library. She was tired, her backpack heavy with textbooks, her mind racing with thoughts of exams and deadlines. She was the kind of student professors admired, diligent, disciplined, a future leader. She had a family who adored her, friends who leaned on her, and dreams that stretched far beyond the edges of this little town. As she walked home, her shoes tapping rhythmically against the pavement, she was entirely unaware of the shadow moving behind her. She didn't hear the faint shuffle of footsteps that weren't her own. She didn't see the figure that lingered in the distance, watching, waiting. The attack was sudden, brutal, and merciless. Her screams pierced the night for only a moment before they were swallowed by the stillness of the town. Windows stayed shut. Curtains remained drawn. Fear has a way of silencing entire neighborhoods. Hours later, the sound of police sirens split the quiet like a blade. Blue and red lights flashed against houses as patrol cars sped through the streets. Doors cracked open. Neighbors whispered. A terrible truth spread quickly: something horrific had happened, something that would change their town forever. The next morning, the community woke not to the sound of alarm clocks, but to shock. To dread. Newspapers screamed with bold black letters, "Brutal assault rocks quiet town." Coffee shops buzzed with rumors. At kitchen tables, parents looked into the eyes of their daughters with unease, silently wondering if they were safe. The pressure on police detectives was instant and unrelenting: find the monster who did this. And find him fast. But what happens when pressure replaces patience? When fear clouds judgment? When the demand for a quick arrest overshadows the truth? Within just days, suspicion turned toward a young black man who lived only a few blocks away. His name was Marcus Johnson. Marcus was 23 years old. A factory worker. Tall, soft-spoken, and deeply protective of his family. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no reason to ever be on the radar of police. On the night of the attack, Marcus had been sitting at home, watching television with his mother. That's all. That was his evening. But in the eyes of investigators, Marcus seemed to fit a profile. The wrong place. The wrong time. And, most damning in the minds of people already conditioned by prejudice, the wrong skin color. Marcus lived in a modest two-story house on a street where children played tag until dusk and where mothers sat on porches to chat during warm evenings. His world was small but steady. Every morning he woke early, packed his lunch in a brown paper bag, and walked to the factory where he'd worked since high school. His co-workers knew him as dependable, the kind of person who never missed a shift, never complained, and never caused trouble. But in 1980s America, in towns like this one, a black man's reliability could be erased in a second if suspicion was cast in his direction. Detectives began circling Marcus almost immediately. They asked neighbors questions. Did you ever see him walking late at night? Did he ever seem angry? Did he ever look at the victim? It didn't matter if the answers were vague or based on nothing more than assumption. Each question planted seeds. Each seed grew into doubt. The town wanted someone to blame, and Marcus, quiet, young, black, and male, became the perfect target. His mother would later recall the night police arrived at their door. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the smell of cornbread in the oven, when a pounding knock rattled the house. Marcus, confused, opened the door to find two officers standing stiffly, their flashlights cutting into his face like interrogation lights. They asked him to step outside. Marcus's mother remembered the look in her son's eyes, not fear at first, but confusion. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He had nothing to hide. He thought, maybe if I just answer their questions, this will be over quickly. But what Marcus didn't know, what his family couldn't have possibly imagined, was that in the eyes of law enforcement, the case wasn't about truth anymore. It was about closure. About speed. About silencing the community's growing panic. And Marcus Johnson was about to become the convenient solution. The town buzzed with speculation. In barbershops, whispers spread. In church pews, prayers were murmured. At gas stations, strangers leaned against pumps and traded rumors. Some people swore they had seen Marcus walking late at night. Others said they'd always had a bad feeling about him, though they couldn't name a single thing he'd ever done wrong. Prejudice disguised itself as memory. Fear disguised itself as fact. The police, emboldened by this growing narrative, doubled down. They began building a case not around evidence, but around perception. Eyewitnesses were sought, though none had truly seen the attack. Rumors hardened into statements. Statements became reports. And slowly, a story took shape, not the story of what actually happened that night, but the story investigators wanted to tell. For Marcus, life as he knew it was collapsing. Each day, he noticed neighbors staring longer than usual. Friends stopped calling. Co-workers grew distant. Whispers followed him. He hadn't even been charged yet, but already, he was being convicted in the court of public opinion. The assault itself, the horror of what had happened to the young woman, was undeniable. The community deserved answers. The victim deserved justice. But what no one seemed to ask was the most important question of all: were they pursuing the right man? That question, unasked and unanswered, would haunt the town for years to come. And Marcus Johnson, an innocent man, was about to step into a nightmare so consuming that it would test not only his freedom, but the very core of his identity. Because once the wheels of suspicion begin turning, once fear grips a community and bias seeps into an investigation, the truth can vanish. And when the truth vanishes, anyone can be destroyed. This was only the beginning. From the very beginning, the investigation was less about finding the truth and more about satisfying the town's hunger for closure. The detectives working the case were under enormous pressure. Newspapers ran daily updates, their headlines screaming for justice. Politicians whispered about public safety. Parents demanded answers at town meetings. And television news cameras circled like vultures, waiting for the police to deliver someone, anyone, in handcuffs. The detectives knew one thing: the longer the case dragged on, the more the town's confidence in them would erode. They needed a suspect. They needed a name. And Marcus Johnson was the perfect fit. The first crack in the door came through shaky witness accounts. One neighbor claimed they had seen someone who looked like Marcus running down the street the night of the attack. They weren't sure. The lighting was poor. The figure had been far away. But still, the words were written down, stamped into an official report, and suddenly, doubt transformed into evidence. Another resident swore the attacker had a similar build to Marcus, tall, broad-shouldered, young. That description could have fit dozens of men in town, but in the context of an investigation already looking for him, it only narrowed the spotlight further. And then came the most dangerous weapon of all, eyewitness identification. The victim, still shaken and traumatized, was asked to participate in a lineup. It should have been a careful, delicate process, one that protected her fragile state of mind and ensured accuracy. But that's not how it went. She was brought into a small room with a pane of glass. Behind it stood several men, all roughly the same height and build. But subtle details betrayed the process. Marcus was the only one wearing a dark jacket, a detail that aligned with earlier witness rumors. He was placed near the center, drawing the eye naturally. The victim looked uncertain. She hesitated, her gaze flickering back and forth across the lineup. Her breathing quickened. The weight of expectation pressed on her shoulders. Detectives encouraged her gently, but firmly, "Take your time. Do you recognize anyone?" She wanted to help. She wanted the nightmare to end. And in that moment, with trauma clouding her memory and authority figures urging her on, she lifted her hand. She pointed at Marcus. That was all the detectives needed. In an instant, the course of Marcus Johnson's life shifted. What had been a rumor, a suspicion, a whisper among neighbors, hardened into a weaponized accusation. The victim's identification, however fragile, however uncertain, was treated as gospel. For the prosecutors, it was the golden ticket. Here was a case with no DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon, no solid physical evidence. Nothing that tied Marcus directly to the crime. But now they had something even more powerful in the eyes of a jury, a victim pointing her finger. It didn't matter that she hesitated. It didn't matter that psychologists had been warning for years about the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, especially under trauma. In the 1980s, those warnings were brushed aside, ignored, drowned out by the allure of certainty. To the prosecutors, the case had just transformed from shaky to airtight. The narrative was perfect. Marcus Johnson, the quiet factory worker, the neighbor from just a few blocks away, was no longer just a man. He was now the face of evil in the community. The media pounced. Local news anchors delivered the story with grim expressions, their voices lowering into tones of moral outrage. Headlines screamed his name. His mugshot, taken the day of his arrest, appeared on front pages beside words like suspect, attacker, and predator. For the public, that was enough. They didn't need DNA. They didn't need fingerprints. They didn't need proof. The image of Marcus in handcuffs, combined with the victim's hesitant identification, sealed his fate in their eyes. Whispers grew louder. Parents warned their children to stay away from men like him. Store clerks eyed his family with suspicion. Even his church community, once a place of refuge, grew tense and divided. Some prayed for him. Others prayed for justice, assuming he was guilty. Marcus himself sat in a holding cell, stunned. He replayed the night of the attack in his mind over and over. He had been home, on the couch, watching television with his mother. He remembered the sitcom reruns that played that evening. He remembered the smell of his mother's cooking drifting from the kitchen. He remembered laughing at a joke. But none of that mattered. He could shout his innocence until his throat was raw. He could replay his alibi 100 times. But once the machinery of accusation began grinding forward, it did not stop. It crushed everything in its path. And Marcus Johnson was directly in its way. Behind the scenes, detectives congratulated themselves. The case, in their minds, was all but solved. Reports were written, neatly stacking suspicion as if it were fact. Prosecutors began drafting their strategy for trial. The victim, though still healing, was prepared to testify. It was a narrative that would play well in court: a young woman brutalized, a community terrorized, and a dangerous man finally brought to justice. But beneath that polished story was a rotting foundation. A neighbor who thought they saw someone who looked like Marcus. Another who swore the attacker had a similar build. And a traumatized victim, nudged ever so slightly toward a choice she could never be certain of. This was the evidence. This was the case. And with it, prosecutors were ready to put Marcus Johnson on trial for his life. The question that hung in the air, though few dared to ask it, was chilling: what if they had the wrong man? What if, in their rush to give the town closure, the real attacker was still out there, free, hidden in plain sight? For Marcus, those questions didn't matter. Because to the police, the prosecutors, and the public, the case was closed. And the trial of Marcus Johnson was about to begin. The courthouse stood like an old fortress in the center of town, its stone walls weathered, its American flag snapping in the late summer breeze. On ordinary days, the building handled small disputes, traffic tickets, local grievances, minor civil matters. But on this day, it became the stage for the most highly anticipated trial the community had seen in decades. By sunrise, people were already lining the steps, eager to claim a seat inside. Reporters lugged heavy cameras and microphones, their vans parked haphazardly around the square, satellite dishes pointed to the sky. Local television crews jockeyed for position, broadcasting live updates. For the town, it was less a trial and more a spectacle, a Hollywood drama unfolding in real life. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Every pew was filled. The air smelled faintly of old wood and nervous sweat. The jury, 12 men and women pulled from the same community that had been buzzing with rumors for months, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Above them, the judge presided sternly, his black robe draped heavily over the bench, his gavel resting within reach. And at the center of it all sat Marcus Johnson. Dressed in a borrowed suit that hung too loosely on his frame, Marcus looked more like a young man preparing for a job interview than a dangerous criminal. His hands were clasped tightly on the defense table, his eyes darting between his attorney, the judge, and the jurors who would decide his fate. His mother and sister sat behind him in the gallery, their faces etched with fear, their hands gripping one another as if letting go would mean losing him forever. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Marcus as a predator hiding in plain sight, a man who had fooled his neighbors, deceived his co-workers, and lurked in the shadows until his violent nature surfaced. The prosecutor's voice was sharp, deliberate, heavy with righteous certainty. He pointed again and again to the victim's testimony. She identified him, he told the jury, his finger jabbing the air with each word. She looked into the face of the man who attacked her, and she said it was Marcus Johnson. What more do you need? The jury watched the victim closely as she took the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted the night of the attack, her hands twisting a tissue until it nearly tore in half. She faltered when asked to describe her attacker, stumbling over details, admitting she hadn't seen much in the darkness. But when the prosecutor pressed her again, asking if she was sure it was Marcus, she whispered, "Yes." That single word echoed through the courtroom. For the prosecution, it was enough. Marcus's defense attorney rose slowly when it was his turn. He was overworked, underpaid, and all too aware of the tide he was fighting against. His suit was wrinkled, his notes scribbled hastily on yellow legal pads. But he fought with everything he had. He called alibi witnesses, Marcus's own mother and sister, who swore under oath that Marcus had been home that night, sitting on the couch with them. He pointed out the absence of physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon. Nothing that directly tied Marcus to the crime. He reminded the jury of the flaws in eyewitness testimony, the danger of memory under trauma, the pressure placed on the victim to make an identification. He begged them to see the cracks, to look beyond the story the prosecution had spun. But the defense attorney's words floated like smoke in a storm. They dissipated quickly, drowned out by the anger radiating from the community. The townspeople weren't just listening to evidence. They were listening to fear. Fear that their quiet community had been violated. Fear that evil could walk among them, unnoticed. Fear that if Marcus wasn't the one, then the real attacker was still out there. And fear demands an answer. To the jury, justice meant someone had to pay. And Marcus, young, black, and already vilified in the media, became that someone. When closing arguments ended, the jury filed out to deliberate. The room buzzed with anticipation, spectators whispering, reporters scribbling notes furiously. Marcus sat still, his head bowed, lips moving in a silent prayer. His mother clutched her rosary in the back row, her fingers trembling as they slipped over each bead. The jury was gone for only 4 hours. When they returned, the room fell into silence so heavy it seemed to press on everyone's chest. The foreman stood, a folded piece of paper in his hand. His voice, steady but devoid of emotion, rang out across the courtroom. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant, Marcus Johnson, guilty. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor's lips curled into a satisfied smile. The defense attorney lowered his head, defeated. Marcus sat frozen. The words washed over him, unreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He turned slightly toward his mother, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if to ask, how? How could they not see? The judge's gavel came down, sealing the verdict into law. Marcus Johnson was sentenced to life in prison. The sound that followed was not just grief, it was devastation. In the back row, his mother collapsed, her scream piercing the solemn silence. Marcus! Marcus, she cried, her voice cracking, raw with anguish. Deputies rushed forward as she tried to push past them, desperate to reach her son. His sister wrapped her arms around her, both of them sobbing uncontrollably. Marcus stood as the deputies cuffed his hands behind his back. The cold metal dug into his wrists. Chains clinked around his ankles as he was led away, his head turning one last time toward his family. His mother's voice echoed in the chamber, breaking through the formality, shattering the illusion of justice. He didn't do it. My son didn't do this. But the system wasn't listening. To the town, the case was closed. To the victim's family, justice had been served. To the headlines, a monster was behind bars. And to Marcus Johnson, life as he knew it was over. The doors of the courtroom closed behind him with a heavy thud. For Marcus, it was the sound of freedom slipping away forever. Prison swallowed Marcus whole. The first days were a blur of noise, iron doors slamming shut, voices echoing down concrete corridors. Marcus, who had once lived in a small home with his mother and sister, now lived in a cell no bigger than a walk-in closet. The walls were cold, damp in winter, stifling in summer. The air carried the smell of sweat, bleach, and despair. The years began to blur. Sunrises and sunsets looked the same through the small, barred window above his bunk. Seasons changed only in subtle ways, the way frost gathered on the metal bars in January, the way heat clung to the walls in July. Outside those bars, the world kept moving. Inside, time moved differently. Slowly. Painfully. Marcus missed everything that makes a life whole. Birthdays passed without candles. Funerals were held without him, his family forced to grieve without their son, their brother. His friends grew older, married, had children. Marcus only heard about these milestones in letters, folded sheets of paper smudged with tears. He read them again and again until the paper grew thin. Every night, when the lights clicked off and the prison sank into a heavy, restless silence, Marcus lay awake on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. He replayed the trial in his head. The victim's uncertain voice. The jury's cold eyes. The sound of his mother screaming in the courtroom. He thought about freedom, about the life he should have been living. He thought about justice, and how far away it seemed. But even in the deepest darkness, Marcus never stopped fighting. He wrote letters. Thousands of them over the years. Letters to journalists, lawyers, non-profit groups, innocence projects, even politicians. Anyone who might listen. Anyone who might care. Please, he wrote, I am innocent. I was home with my family that night. There was no evidence against me. Please, someone look at my case again. Most of those letters went unanswered. Some came back unopened, stamped return to sender. Others arrived with polite rejections, we're sorry, but we cannot take on additional cases at this time. Each rejection was another weight pressing down on his chest. But still, Marcus kept writing. Because what else could he do? Giving up meant letting the system bury him alive. Nearly 20 years passed. Marcus's hair, once dark and thick, grew streaked with gray. His face hardened, his eyes carrying the exhaustion of 2 decades behind bars. He had watched younger men enter prison and grow old beside him. He had seen fights, riots, despair. And yet, through it all, he held on to a sliver of belief, that one day, somehow, the truth would surface. And then, finally, a glimmer of hope appeared. Advances in DNA testing had transformed criminal investigations across the country. Cases once considered closed were being reopened. Wrongfully convicted men and women were being freed. The science, unavailable at the time of Marcus's trial, had become the most powerful tool against wrongful convictions. One day, Marcus received a letter from a legal clinic at a nearby university. A team of young attorneys and law students had reviewed his case. They believed him. And they wanted to help. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, Marcus felt something stir inside him that prison had almost erased. Hope. The legal clinic filed motions, arguing that the evidence from the crime scene, evidence that had sat in storage for nearly 20 years, should be re-examined using modern DNA technology. It wasn't easy. The state resisted. Prosecutors argued the case was settled, that the conviction was final, that reopening it would be pointless. But the legal team pushed hard. They argued that if Marcus truly was innocent, every day he spent behind bars was another day of justice denied. Eventually, after months of back-and-forth battles, a judge agreed, the evidence would be tested. Marcus waited, his heart pounding with every passing day. Inmates around him told stories of hope crushed, of appeals denied, of dreams destroyed. He tried not to listen. He tried not to imagine what would happen if the results didn't go his way. But every night, he whispered the same prayer he had whispered for 20 years, let the truth come out. And then, one morning, it did. The DNA results came back. The evidence from the crime scene, the evidence used to condemn Marcus to a lifetime in prison, had finally been tested. The results shattered everything. The DNA wasn't Marcus's. It belonged to another man. A convicted offender already sitting in prison for a different assault. A man who matched the description more closely than Marcus ever had. A man whose crimes followed a disturbing pattern. The truth was undeniable. Marcus Johnson had lost 2 decades of his life for a crime he never committed. When Marcus heard the news, he sat silently for a long time. The words didn't sink in at first. 2 decades of disbelief and rejection had conditioned him to expect the worst. But slowly, the weight began to lift. His chest felt lighter. His hands trembled. He pressed his palms to his face and wept. Not tears of sorrow. Tears of release. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus could finally see the possibility of freedom. But while the DNA evidence had cleared his name in science, the legal system was not so quick to admit its mistake. Marcus's fight wasn't over. The question now loomed, would the same system that stole his freedom for 20 years have the courage to give it back? The day Marcus walked free, the cameras were back. The same courthouse steps that had once been crowded with reporters during his trial were now packed again, but for a very different reason. News vans lined the street. Microphones clustered together like a forest of steel and foam. Cameramen jostled for position, each desperate to capture the moment. And then, the prison gates opened. Marcus Johnson stepped forward, blinking against the sunlight he had not felt on his face without bars between him and the sky in nearly 20 years. He looked older now, his once youthful frame weathered by 2 decades of survival behind walls designed to break men. His hair was gray at the edges. Lines carved his face. Yet there was still something unbroken in his eyes, the quiet fire of a man who had endured the impossible and refused to disappear. In the crowd, a frail figure pushed forward. His mother. She had grown old waiting for this day. Her back bent, her hair thin, her steps careful. But the moment she saw her son, her boy, walking free, she found strength that seemed to rise from the deepest part of her soul. She clung to him, arms wrapping around his chest, tears soaking into his shirt. Through sobs, she whispered into his ear, "I knew you'd come home." The cameras caught everything. The embrace. The tears. The decades of pain, collapse, and endurance spilling into a single moment of reunion. But freedom did not erase the damage. Marcus had missed nearly half his life. The birthdays that came and went without candles. The funerals he couldn't attend, forced to mourn alone in his cell. The opportunities, a career, a family, children of his own, stolen forever by a verdict built on shadows. He walked out of prison and into a world he barely recognized. In 1989, when he was first locked away, cell phones were bulky luxuries, computers were rare, and the word internet was something only researchers whispered about. Now, as he stepped into freedom, the world was lit by glowing screens. Everyone carried smartphones. Strangers scrolled endlessly, their faces bathed in blue light. Cars spoke with voices. The culture had transformed, and Marcus, still young in memory but aged in body, was a stranger in his own time. At a press conference later that day, Marcus stood before a sea of microphones. Reporters shouted questions, their words tumbling over each other. How do you feel? What do you want to do now? Do you forgive the system? He held up his hand, silencing the noise. His voice, steady but heavy with decades of pain, carried across the crowd. The system doesn't just make mistakes, he said. It destroys lives. I survived prison, but I'll never get back the years they stole from me. His words hung in the air. Not bitter. Not angry. Just devastatingly true. But Marcus's story, as extraordinary as it was not rare. Since the 1980s, more than 3,000 people in America have been exonerated. Thousands of men and women, just like Marcus, have walked into courtrooms labeled criminals and walked out of prisons decades later as victims of the very system meant to protect them. The patterns are hauntingly familiar. Eyewitness misidentification. Traumatized victims pressured to point to someone, anyone. Racial bias. Communities quick to see guilt in the color of a man's skin. Junk science. Flawed forensic methods sold as truth. Prosecutorial misconduct. The pursuit of convictions over justice. Each wrongful conviction is not just a mistake. It is a life shattered. A family broken. A story rewritten by error and indifference. The system demands certainty. But certainty, in the absence of truth, is dangerous. It silences doubt. It buries questions. It convinces juries to trade probability for finality. And certainty is what stole 20 years from Marcus Johnson. When he finally returned home with his mother, their modest house looked the same, but the world inside had changed. The furniture was older, the wallpaper faded, family photographs showing years of memories he had not lived. His sister's children, once toddlers in the photographs he studied in prison, now stood before him as grown adults. He smiled through tears, hugging them tightly, but deep inside he felt the weight of absence. He had been there for none of it. The truth had set Marcus free. But it had come too late. For Marcus Johnson, justice delayed was justice denied. And for all of us, his story is a warning. Because if the system could destroy Marcus's life with nothing more than shaky testimony, bias, and the illusion of certainty, then it could happen again. It does happen again. Every day. The question is not whether Marcus's story is rare. The question is, how many more Marcus Johnsons are still behind bars, waiting for the truth to be heard? Willow Creek, Oregon, 2019. Willow Creek was the kind of town where secrets had a way of floating to the surface, like driftwood on the lake, eventually carried to shore for everyone to see. It sat tucked between evergreen hills and the still, slate-blue water of Lake Norwood, a place where mornings smelled faintly of pine and evenings glowed with the orange reflection of sunset on the ripples. If you drove through its single main street, you'd see the same lineup of businesses that had been there for decades: Murphy's General Store with its creaky wooden floorboards, the Willow Diner where the coffee was always hot but never quite good, and Harper's Bait and Tackle, which doubled as the unofficial meeting point for men who pretended they were just talking fishing, but were really swapping stories about everyone else in town. And in a place this small, everyone was a story. Emily Carter and Daniel Reeves had always been the favorite chapter. Emily was the kind of woman people described as gentle, not because she was shy, but because everything she did seemed deliberate, measured. She taught 3rd grade at Willow Creek Elementary, and had this way of making even the most restless child sit still when she read aloud. In the afternoons, she liked to walk along the lake trail, stopping at a particular bench under a leaning cedar tree to jot down bits of poetry in her weathered leather notebook. Daniel, on the other hand, was all easy charm and strong hands. He worked as a carpenter, crafting everything from hand-carved furniture to fixing broken porches. There wasn't a soul in Willow Creek who hadn't called him for help at some point, and he never turned them down. Broad-shouldered, tanned from years of working outdoors, and with a smile that could make even old Mrs. Peterson from the library blush, Daniel was the kind of man people liked instantly. They'd been together since high school, prom dates turned soulmates, or so the town believed. In a place where breakups were common and divorces were whispered about for years, Emily and Daniel were proof that love could last. At least, that's what everyone thought. The first whispers began like they always do in small towns, casually, almost carelessly. One Saturday morning in June 2019, Margaret Willis, who ran the tiny florist shop on Main, mentioned to her sister over coffee that she'd seen Emily sitting in the corner booth of the Willow Diner, with a man she didn't recognize. Not Daniel. The stranger was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt that looked far too polished for Willow Creek's usual crowd. The two of them sat close, their heads tilted in as they talked. Margaret had been busy filling an order for wedding centerpieces, but she'd caught enough to notice something off. Emily wasn't her usual smiling self. She looked tense. By Monday, the story had spread from the florist to the diner to the bait shop, mutating slightly each time it was told. Some said the man was a relative from out of town. Others were convinced he was more than that. When Daniel was asked about it, casually, of course, maybe at the counter of the hardware store, he'd laugh it off. Just a friend of hers, he'd say, with that calm, steady smile. It was the same smile he'd had since high school, the one that reassured people instantly. But smiles can hide a lot. Inside, Daniel felt a slow, sour unease curling in his chest. He told himself not to overthink it. Emily wasn't the kind of woman to betray him. They'd built too much together, shared too many years. But still, the image of her sitting with that stranger stuck in his mind, replaying at odd moments. While sanding down a table leg. While lying in bed at night. While driving past the diner. It didn't help that Emily never mentioned it. Life in Willow Creek rolled on as usual, but for Daniel, something had shifted. He started noticing little things he'd never paid attention to before. Emily's phone, face down on the kitchen counter when he walked in. The way she'd pause before answering a text. The fact that she seemed distracted lately, her thoughts somewhere far away. And then, one evening in late June, he found something that deepened his unease. Emily had left her leather notebook on the porch swing, open to a page that wasn't poetry at all. Instead, it was a list. Names. Times. Places. Most were ordinary: grocery, 4 p.m., school supply order. But one stood out. M. Willow Diner, 2:30 p.m. Daniel stared at the single initial. M. He thought of the stranger in the crisp shirt. He thought of the gossip. And something in him tightened. Michael Lawson. The name spread through Willow Creek slowly, the way a chill creeps into a house when someone leaves the window open. People didn't know much about him at first, only that he was from Portland, that he had a camera slung over his shoulder more often than not, and that he drove a beat-up silver Ford pickup with Oregon plates and a dent in the driver's side door. The truth, Emily explained to anyone curious enough to ask, was simple: Michael was a freelance photographer working on a travel book. Willow Creek, with its glassy lake and misty hills, had caught his attention. He'd come chasing landscapes, but stayed because the town seemed to offer something more. Emily met him on a breezy Saturday morning in early June, at the farmer's market that ran along the edge of Main Street. She'd been standing in front of a stall stacked with golden honey jars and punnets of raspberries when he spoke. "Do you know if the lake really looks like the postcards?" She turned, surprised. He was taller than she expected, with dark hair that curled at the ends and a 3-day stubble that gave him an unpolished charm. His camera hung from a thick strap across his chest, his fingers absently turning the focus ring as they talked. "It depends," she told him. "If you're here at noon, it's just blue water. But at sunset, it's like glass holding fire." That was all it took. Michael asked if she could point him to the best spots for shooting. She mentioned the cedar bench on the lake trail, the one she liked to visit when she was writing. They parted with a smile, and she thought nothing more of it, at least not then. In the weeks that followed, Michael's presence in Emily's life went from occasional to routine. He had a way of making even mundane conversations feel like shared secrets. Emily told Daniel about him at first, about his work, his stories from traveling the coast, the strange people he'd met along the way. "He's helping me get back into my writing," she explained one evening over dinner. "It's like, his photos make me want to put words to them." Daniel nodded, chewing slowly. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with it. But he couldn't help noticing how animated she became when she talked about Michael, the way her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't in a long time. By late June, subtle changes began creeping into their home life. Emily stayed late after school more often, claiming she needed to finish grading or prep for the next day. Her phone, once left casually on the coffee table, now stayed close to her hand, face down. Sometimes it buzzed with a message she wouldn't open until Daniel wasn't looking. He told himself not to be paranoid. He trusted her. Or at least, he used to. Then came the rainy evening. The kind of rain Willow Creek was known for: steady, cold, soaking everything in a gray haze. Daniel was driving home from the hardware store when he took a side road to avoid a fallen tree. It curved past the old lumberyard, then the empty stretch near the edge of town where only a few street lamps burned weakly against the mist. That's when he saw it. Michael's silver truck, parked facing the trees. Wipers ticking back and forth. Inside, Emily sat in the passenger seat. Her head rested against Michael's shoulder. They weren't kissing, weren't even speaking, just sitting there, looking ahead at nothing. But Daniel felt it in his chest, a sharp, sudden break in something he thought was solid. It was in that quiet, unremarkable moment that his certainty about Emily began to collapse. September 14th, the Harvest Fair. Every fall, Willow Creek transformed for one weekend. The streets were strung with gold and crimson banners, the air smelled of cinnamon, wood smoke, and hot cider. Families wandered between stalls selling handmade quilts, jars of preserves, and fresh pies. It was a tradition older than most of the people in town, and for many, it marked the last big gathering before winter settled in. Daniel and Emily arrived together, just like they always had. From a distance, they looked like any other couple, walking side by side, smiling politely at neighbors, stopping to greet old friends. But to anyone paying close attention, the cracks were there. Daniel's jaw was set in that locked, grinding way that comes from holding back words. His eyes moved constantly, not on the stalls or the games, but over the crowd, scanning, searching. And when he found what he was looking for, his expression tightened further. Michael. He stood near the cider stand, camera in hand, snapping candid shots of children on hay bales and couples holding caramel apples. But when Emily drifted toward him, Daniel caught the change in Michael's smile, subtle, but there. The two of them laughed together, heads tilted in toward one another, as if the rest of the fair faded away. Daniel didn't walk over. He didn't cause a scene. Instead, he stood there, his hands curling into loose fists in his jacket pockets, the noise of the fair muffled by the blood rushing in his ears. That night, when Emily finally came home, she found Daniel sitting in the living room, not watching TV, not reading, just sitting. The conversation started quietly enough. A question about how much time she'd been spending with Michael. A half-hearted reassurance from Emily that it was nothing. But the calm frayed quickly. "You've been lying to me," Daniel said, his voice low but hard. "No," Emily shot back, "you've been looking for lies that aren't there. You're trying to control who I talk to, where I go. It's not control when it's my wife." The word wife hit the air like a hammer. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then the shouting began in earnest, sharp, fast, and raw. Years of unspoken frustrations rushed in, turning the conversation into something far larger than Michael. And then, as quickly as it had started, Daniel grabbed his truck keys. "I need to get out of here." The door slammed behind him. He didn't have a destination in mind. He drove without thinking, letting the winding roads pull him through the outskirts of town, past silent barns and dark fields, into the tree-lined backroads near the lake. The headlights carved tunnels of light through the fog drifting low over the water. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the air was still damp, heavy. That's when he saw it. A familiar silver truck, parked by the water's edge. No other cars around. The interior light glowed faintly, just enough for Daniel to make out the outline of someone in the driver's seat. Michael. Daniel slowed, pulling onto the shoulder, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He didn't know exactly why he'd stopped, only that whatever was about to happen would change everything. From this point forward, the night is reconstructed not from Daniel's account, because Daniel never gave one, but from fragments, the pings of cell towers, a grainy security camera mounted outside the Lake Norwood boathouse, and the testimony of a lone fisherman anchored on the far side of the cove. What we know is this. 10:42 p.m. Michael's silver truck sits idling near the shoreline, its headlights washing over the damp gravel. He's leaning back in the driver's seat, phone in hand, when another pair of headlights sweeps in from the road. Daniel's truck pulls in fast, braking hard enough to spit gravel against the wheel wells. The fisherman says he heard the slam of a door, then footsteps. Daniel moves toward the silver truck, shoulders tense, arms swinging slightly as if he's trying to burn off energy. He stops at the driver's side and pounds on the window, 3 hard knocks. Michael startles, then opens the door. He steps out slowly, one hand raised, palm open, like he's facing a skittish animal. "Daniel. You need to calm down." 10:43 p.m., the security camera catches shapes moving in the dark. No clear faces, no words, but the fisherman hears them. Shouting. Daniel's voice is sharp, cracking through the night air. "You've been destroying my marriage." Michael's response is lower, measured, the tone of someone trying to keep control. "Emily deserves better." Those 3 words slice through the fog. "Better than you." Later, prosecutors would call this moment an explosive emotional break. Experts would talk about adrenaline, fight-or-flight responses, tunnel vision. But in reality, it happened faster than anyone could explain. Daniel takes a step back, not retreating, but toward his own truck. He reaches into the bed and pulls out a tire iron. Michael sees it. His own hands go up higher. His voice gets sharper. "Daniel." The struggle is quick. A flurry of motion, a flash of metal catching the light. The fisherman hears a choked sound, not quite a shout, not quite a cry. Then nothing but the slap of water against the shore. 10:44 p.m. Michael crumples to the gravel, his breath gone, blood running dark in the dim light. Daniel just stands there, chest heaving, the tire iron hanging loose in his grip. He can hear the faint rush of the lake, the distant call of a night bird, his own pulse thundering in his ears. And then, as if guided by something automatic, detached, he moves. He drops the tire iron in the bed of his truck. He bends down, gripping Michael under the arms, his fingers slipping against wet fabric. The fisherman hears the scrape of boots on gravel, the drag of weight. Daniel hauls him to the water's edge. The surface is calm, black, reflecting the faint shimmer of the moon. Without a word, he lets go. Michael's body slides into the lake, the water swallowing it with barely a ripple. 3 days later. The lake gave him back. It was early morning when the call came in. A local fisherman had found something tangled in his net, something heavy that didn't belong to the water. The sheriff's deputies arrived to find Michael Lawson's body drifting just beneath the surface, caught in a mess of nylon line and lakeweed. The air was still, but there was a quiet hum of voices as they worked. A deputy waded waist-deep into the water, guiding the body to shore while another draped a tarp over the scene. The autopsy confirmed what everyone suspected: blunt force trauma to the head. No defensive wounds. No signs of a prolonged fight. It was over in seconds. The investigation. The detectives didn't have to look far. Daniel Reeves' name came up before the sun had set that same day. He had no alibi for the night Michael died. His truck had been seen by the lake on the security footage. Fingerprints matching Daniel's were lifted from the driver's side door of Michael's truck. And when questioned, Daniel's version of events kept shifting, small details changing each time he told the story, as if he couldn't keep the lie straight in his head. When the evidence was finally laid out in front of him, the fight drained from his body. "I didn't mean to kill him," he told the detectives, his voice breaking. I couldn't stand losing her." The trial. By the time the case reached court, Willow Creek had split into factions. Some believed Daniel's act was a tragic mistake, the kind anyone might make in a moment of emotional collapse. Others saw it as the inevitable result of a possessive man unwilling to let go. Emily sat in the witness stand, pale, hands trembling, eyes fixed somewhere far away. "Yes," she said under oath, "I cared for Michael. But we were never romantically involved. He was a friend. Someone who encouraged me to write again, to believe in myself. That was all." Her words hung in the courtroom like a cold draft. Daniel didn't look at her as she spoke. The sentence. The jury took less than a day. Guilty. 28 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary for second-degree murder. No chance of parole until 2047. Daniel was led from the courtroom in shackles, his head bowed, his face unreadable. Emily stayed in her seat for a long moment after he was gone, as if leaving would make the finality of it too real. The aftermath. Months later, Emily agreed to one final interview with the local news, sitting at her kitchen table, the lake visible in the background through a rain-speckled window. "People think crimes of passion are about love," she said softly. "But they're really about control. And when control slips away, love can turn into something unrecognizable and deadly." The camera lingered on her face for a moment longer. Then the frame shifted to the lake, calm, still, its surface giving nothing away. But in Willow Creek, people had learned a hard truth that year: still waters can hide the darkest depths. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're into true crime stories told straight up, no distractions, just the story, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and like each video so you don't miss the next case I cover. Alright, let's get into today's story. It all started in the spring of 2018. Jessica Miller, a 34-year-old nurse from Ohio, had lived her life quietly. For years, her world had been defined by 12-hour hospital shifts, fluorescent lights, and the soft beeping of monitors. The patients came and went, the paperwork piled high, and her co-workers rotated in and out, but Jessica remained constant. She wasn't unhappy, not exactly. She loved nursing, the satisfaction of helping someone walk again, the relief of telling a worried family member that their loved one would be okay. But when the shift ended, and she drove home under the hum of streetlights, reality hit. Her apartment was small but tidy. A framed photo of her late mother sat on the mantel. Her golden retriever, Max, wagged his tail furiously at her return every night, the one soul in the world who seemed to notice whether she was home or not. But after she fed Max, after she showered, after she heated up leftovers and ate in silence, the loneliness crept in. It was always worse at night. The glow of her phone screen became her companion. Instagram, Facebook, sometimes Netflix if she could focus. But mostly, dating apps. She swiped left, swiped right, half out of boredom, half out of hope. Jessica wasn't naive. She knew dating apps could be a minefield: ghosting, fake profiles, men who only wanted one thing. But she also knew friends who had found real relationships online. So, she told herself, why not me? Then, one ordinary night in late April, she saw him. Daniel Hart. The profile almost seemed too good to be true. A strong jawline, piercing blue eyes, a smile that radiated confidence. In one photo, he stood in front of a glittering skyline, Dubai, the caption read. In another, he wore a crisp white shirt on the deck of a yacht. Another showed him in a hard hat, standing at an oil rig. His bio read: engineer, traveler, dreamer, looking for something real. Something about him made her pause. He wasn't just attractive, he looked established. A man with purpose, ambition, direction. And then came the message. Not a cheesy pickup line. Not a lazy, hey. Instead, hi Jessica. I couldn't help but notice we share a love for medical dramas. Which one's your favorite? She blinked. Most men didn't even read her profile. But Daniel had. That was the beginning. Over the next few days, they talked constantly. His messages weren't rushed or shallow. He asked about her childhood, her mother, her dreams of one day traveling to Italy. He remembered the details, circling back to them in later conversations. When Jessica mentioned that her mother had passed away 5 years ago, Daniel didn't just say, sorry to hear that. He asked her what her mother's name was. Martha, Jessica typed. The next day, on what would have been her mother's birthday, Jessica walked into the nurse's station at the hospital to find a bouquet of lilies waiting for her. The card read, thinking of Martha today. Daniel. Her co-workers gushed. Who's the new guy? Wow, he's a keeper. Jessica blushed, half embarrassed, half elated. It felt like something was finally happening for her. Daniel told her he was an oil engineer based in Dubai, but originally from Texas. His work kept him overseas for months at a time, but he assured her that once his current contract ended, he'd be back in the States. He wanted to meet her in person. Their conversations deepened. They started with texts, then moved to long late-night calls. His voice was smooth, steady, and warm. He told her about his work, managing complicated drilling projects, negotiating with international partners. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had seen the world. Jessica found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about the stress of nursing, about the nights she cried in the supply closet after losing a patient. He didn't just listen, he validated her. He told her she was stronger than she realized. That she was a hero. No man had ever made her feel so seen. Within weeks, Jessica was telling friends she had finally found the one. Her best friend, Melissa, was skeptical. Jess, don't you think it's a little fast? You've never even met him in person. Jessica waved her off. Not everyone understands. This is real, Mel. I can feel it. The truth was, Jessica was already picturing a future with Daniel. She imagined introducing him to her father, taking Max for walks together, maybe even moving somewhere new, anywhere but Ohio. Daniel made her feel like her life, which had been stuck in gray monotony, was suddenly painted in color. But what Jessica didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Daniel Hart never existed. The man on the other end of the phone wasn't who he claimed to be. And soon, Jessica's quiet life was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. Their romance unfolded entirely online. At first, Jessica told herself it didn't matter. Distance was temporary. Love wasn't. And besides, Daniel made up for the miles between them with his attention. He was there every morning with a "Good morning, beautiful." Every night with a whispered, "Sleep well, my love." Hours disappeared into late-night texts. They traded stories, secrets, dreams. He told her about growing up in Texas, about fishing with his grandfather, about the time he broke his arm riding dirt bikes at 12. Jessica shared her childhood too, the treehouse her father had built, the smell of her mother's perfume, the ache of losing her when she was only 29. They laughed together over corny jokes. They even fought once or twice, about silly things, only to make up quickly with sweet words. And then there were the calls. Sometimes they spoke for hours, Daniel's voice deep and steady, comforting in a way Jessica hadn't known she needed. Other times, he would promise a video call. Jessica would brush her hair, put on lip gloss, and wait for the screen to light up. But when it did, the image was never clear. The camera mysteriously glitched. His face would blur, freeze, or cut out altogether. "I don't know what's wrong with my Wi-Fi," Daniel would sigh, frustration lacing his voice. "Babe, I wish you could see me right now. I'm smiling at you." Jessica wanted to believe him. So she did. And then came the promise. "I'll be home soon," he told her one night, his voice soft, like a secret meant only for her. "Once this contract is done, I'll fly straight to you. No more screens, Jess. Just us." She closed her eyes, clutching the phone to her chest, imagining it, meeting him at the airport, his arms wrapping around her, finally touching the man who had already touched her heart. But dreams have a way of shattering. The first request for money came 3 months in. Daniel called, his tone different, tight, anxious. "Jess, baby. I don't want to scare you, but something happened at the site today." Her heart skipped. What happened? There was an equipment accident. Nothing major, thank God. But some local authorities are claiming negligence. They're holding me here until legal fees are settled. Jess, I can't access my US accounts while I'm overseas. Everything's tied up in the company's system. Jessica's stomach tightened. What do you mean, they're holding you? Not jail, he said quickly. But I can't leave until this is cleared. And Jess, his voice cracked, just enough to sound human. I hate asking you this. But I need your help. If I could get $5,000 to cover the fees, I'd be free to come home. To you. Jessica froze. $5,000? She didn't have that kind of money lying around. Daniel, that's a lot. I know, baby, I know. His words rushed out, desperation coating every syllable. I would never, ever ask if it wasn't life or death. I'll pay you back the moment I land. I swear it on my mother's grave. He sounded so sincere. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. That night, Jessica drained her small savings account and wired the money. But it didn't stop there. One payment turned into 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. Each time, the story shifted just enough to sound believable. There was a customs fee. A company delay. A hospital bill after Daniel claimed he'd been injured on site. Once, he even said his passport had been confiscated and he needed money to get it released. And each time, Jessica hesitated. She stared at her bank account, watching the numbers sink lower and lower. But then Daniel would send a message that broke her heart open all over again. Jess, you're the only person I can trust. When this is over, I'll make you the happiest woman alive. We'll get married. I promise. And she would send more. First her savings. Then her credit cards. Then, in a move that made her father's voice echo in the back of her mind, she refinanced her car. By the end of the year, Jessica had sent Daniel nearly $95,000. Her best friend, Laura, saw the signs. Jess, listen to yourself, Laura said one night over coffee. $95,000? For a man you've never even seen properly on video? Don't you think something's off? Jessica bristled. You don't understand him. He's not like other guys. He loves me. Laura's eyes softened. Sweetie, love doesn't ask you to drain your entire life savings. But Jessica shook her head, unwilling to hear it. Because if Laura was right, then everything Jessica had sacrificed wasn't for love, it was for nothing. And Jessica couldn't bear that thought. The months dragged on. Daniel's excuses grew thinner, but his promises grew sweeter. Baby, just one more payment and I'll be free. Baby, I can see the finish line. Baby, I'm coming home. Those words, I'm coming home, became her anchor. Her reason. Every time she questioned him, every time her gut twisted, he dangled that phrase in front of her. Until one night, his voice low and tender, Daniel finally said the words she had been waiting for. Baby. I'm coming home. Jessica cried with relief. The months of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the empty bank account, it had all been worth it. Or so she thought. It was a rainy night in November. The kind of rain that comes down in sheets, blurring the city lights into a smear of yellow and red. Jessica drove downtown with trembling hands on the steering wheel, her wipers fighting to keep up. Daniel had promised. Finally. This was the night she'd been dreaming about for nearly a year, the night he would step out of fantasy and into reality. No more phone calls. No more glitching video screens. No more waiting. He was here. In Ohio. For her. Jessica had booked a boutique hotel near the river, a place with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs, the kind of romantic backdrop she'd imagined for their first night together. She checked in, carrying a suitcase filled with carefully chosen outfits, perfume, and the necklace her mother had given her before she died. Inside her room, Jessica stood in front of the mirror for almost an hour, curling and recurling her hair, reapplying lipstick, checking her phone every few minutes for Daniel's text. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she imagined the moment, knocking on the door, opening it, seeing him standing there in the flesh. She wanted to get it right. She wanted this night to be perfect. At 9:41 p.m., she got the message. "Babe, I'm outside your room." 304. Jessica's hands shook as she smoothed her dress and crossed the carpet. She took a deep breath, then opened the door. And froze. It wasn't him. Not the chiseled man from the photos. Not the polished engineer she'd pictured for months. Standing in the doorway was a stranger. A middle-aged man, gaunt and pale, with sunken eyes and trembling hands. His hair was unkempt, his shirt damp from the rain. He smelled faintly of cigarettes and something sour. "Jessica?" he asked, his voice raspy. For a split second, Jessica's brain refused to process what she was seeing. Her mouth went dry. Who are you?" she whispered. The man smiled weakly, almost apologetically. "It's me. Daniel." Her stomach dropped. The walls seemed to close in around her. No, you're not." He stepped inside without waiting for permission. "I can explain." What happened next would never be known in full. Only fragments, pieced together from hotel cameras, police reports, and grim evidence left behind. At 9:42 p.m., hotel security cameras showed the man, later identified as Mark Holloway, entering Jessica's room. By morning, it was over. Housekeepers opened the door at 10:15 a.m. and found Jessica lying on the carpet, lifeless. Her body showed clear signs of struggle. The cause of death, strangulation. Her purse was gone. Her phone was missing. Her money, what little she had left, had disappeared. The hotel room was quiet, except for the rain still tapping against the window. Police were called immediately. Detectives pored over the grainy footage. The man's face was clear enough to identify: Mark Holloway, 46 years old. His record stretched back decades: fraud, burglary, multiple prison stints. He was a drifter, in and out of halfway houses, never holding down a job for more than a few months. But this time was different. This wasn't just fraud. This was murder. When police finally tracked Holloway down 3 days later, he was hiding in a rundown motel 2 towns over. He still had Jessica's purse. He still had her phone. And yet, as detectives began their interrogation, a darker truth emerged. Mark Holloway hadn't acted alone. Behind him, pulling the strings, was someone else. Someone who had built the illusion of Daniel Hart. Someone who had written the messages, whispered the promises, and drained Jessica's life savings one payment at a time. Holloway was just the front man, the one who showed up at the end. The real puppeteer? Still out there. And what police would discover next would take the case into territory darker than anyone expected. The interrogation room was cold, its fluorescent lights humming above the scarred wooden table. Mark Holloway sat slumped in the metal chair, his wrists cuffed, his eyes bloodshot. Across from him, Detective Alvarez leaned forward, a file spread open with Jessica's photo staring up like an accusation. "Why Jessica Miller?" Alvarez asked. Mark shook his head slowly. "You don't get it. I never talked to her. Not once." The detective narrowed his eyes. "Then who did?" Mark licked his cracked lips. "The boss. I'm just the collector. That's my job. I show up at the end, take the money, and if there are loose ends," he paused, eyes darting to the two-way mirror, "I tie them up." The room went silent. Jessica's murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was part of a system. A machine. And Mark Holloway was just one gear in it. When investigators dug deeper, the truth began to unravel. The mastermind wasn't Daniel Hart. Because Daniel Hart never existed. The real puppeteer was a woman, Sophia Klein. A name few people had ever heard, but one that would soon make headlines nationwide. Sophia was no ordinary scammer. She was tech-savvy, meticulous, patient. From behind her computer, she spun digital webs with a dozen fake identities. Male, female, young, old, it didn't matter. With stolen photos, carefully curated backstories, and advanced voice-modifying software, she could be anyone. And for over a year, she had been Daniel Hart. Every message Jessica received, every perfectly timed call, every glitching video feed, it was Sophia. She orchestrated everything from her laptop, weaving lies with the precision of a surgeon. Mark was simply the final act, the one sent to collect. But Jessica wasn't the first. As investigators traced Sophia's digital footprint, they uncovered a chilling pattern. At least 6 women, scattered across the Midwest, had fallen for her elaborate scams. Each one followed the same script. The perfect online romance. The first request for money. The endless cycle of promises and payments. And each woman ended the same way, financially devastated. One victim had lost her retirement savings. Another, her house. A third had even filed for bankruptcy. But Jessica's case was different. Jessica had lost more than money. Jessica had lost her life. The revelation shook everyone who knew her. But for Laura, Jessica's best friend, the news carried an extra layer of horror. Because when detectives traced Sophia Klein's movements, they discovered that she hadn't been operating from some distant country or anonymous city. She had been living just 2 doors down from Laura. Right there. In the same quiet apartment complex where Laura and Jessica shared wine nights, swapped stories, and whispered about Jessica's mysterious boyfriend. All the while, Sophia Klein, the woman who had built Daniel Hart from nothing, had been only steps away. Watching. Listening. Playing both predator and neighbor. It was a detail so chilling, so surreal, that detectives themselves admitted it felt like a movie script. Sophia Klein had managed to live in plain sight, blending in as just another resident. A woman who smiled politely in the hallway, carried groceries up the stairs, waved to neighbors on Sunday mornings. But behind closed doors, she was building identities, luring victims, and destroying lives, all from the glow of a laptop screen. Jessica never stood a chance. And as the investigation deepened, one terrifying question emerged. If Sophia had been operating this close to Laura, had Laura herself been a target? Or worse, had Sophia already begun setting her sights on the next victim? When investigators dug deeper, the case that already felt like something from a nightmare twisted into something almost unbelievable. Sophia Klein, the elusive scammer, the ghost behind the mask of Daniel Hart, wasn't just a random predator. She was family. Records revealed that Sophia and Laura, Jessica's closest friend, shared the same father. Half-sisters. Estranged since childhood. Laura had always known her father had another daughter somewhere out there. A product of a short-lived relationship he rarely spoke about. But she never imagined that the other daughter had been living just down the hall. Never imagined that while she was warning Jessica about an online scammer, the scammer was in fact her own blood. The betrayal cut deep. Laura sat in the courtroom months later, staring across the aisle at Sophia. The same eyes. The same dark hair. A reflection of herself twisted into something monstrous. But the most heartbreaking discovery came not from Sophia, nor from Mark Holloway, but from Jessica herself. On Jessica's phone, detectives uncovered a series of unsent draft messages, words she had typed but never found the courage to send. In them, Jessica began to voice the doubts she had buried for so long. One draft read, "Daniel, sometimes I wonder if you're really who you say you are. I'm scared I've made a mistake. Another. My friends think I'm being scammed. I don't want to believe them, but sometimes I feel like they might be right. And then, the one that silenced the courtroom when it was read aloud. If he's not real, I'll walk away tomorrow. She had been so close. One more day. One more night. And Jessica might have walked away, saved herself, reclaimed her life. But Sophia knew. Paranoid, desperate, and unwilling to lose control, Sophia had pulled the final string. She sent Mark, not to love Jessica, not to finally make Daniel real, but to silence her forever. During the trial, Laura broke down on the witness stand. Her voice cracked as she told the jury how she had begged Jessica to stop sending money, how she had tried to protect her, and how she never once imagined that the predator was her own half-sister. Sophia Klein showed little remorse. Her defense argued she had been desperate, that her life had spiraled into manipulation and crime long before Jessica. But the jury didn't buy it. The evidence was overwhelming: the digital trails, the stolen identities, the confessions. Sophia was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Mark Holloway, her accomplice, received 45 years. Justice, in the legal sense, was served. But for Jessica, it came too late. Jessica Miller's story became another grim entry in the long and growing list of online romance scam tragedies. A nurse who had devoted her life to caring for others. A woman who only wanted to be loved. A daughter who still grieved her mother, a friend who had trusted the wrong stranger. She thought she had met the love of her life. Instead, she had walked straight into the arms of her killer. And the cruelest twist of all? The one person who might have saved her, the best friend who warned her again and again, had been living just doors away from the woman who stole everything. So, the next time you think about sharing your heart online, remember this. Not every love story has a happy ending. Some end in heartbreak. Some end in betrayal. And some, like Jessica's, end in tragedy.